Welcome to CrimeScene. I think it's going to be a very, very fun day today. It's great to see all you here. I'm just going to do a couple of quick announcements here. My name's Peter Mock, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the buyer for McIntyre's across the parking lot, and I'm the big mystery fan of the store, and this is sort of like my baby, and it's so good to see so many people here to come listen to all these great authors. I can honestly say that for every writer who's here, I've pretty much read almost all their books. So if you have any questions about any of them, come see me. I can talk to you about them. Now, I am going to mention that we are missing 3 authors. Mur Lafferty, David Swinson, and Hannah Morrissey. And we do have their books for sale over there. I just want to say, don't skip them. You might want to take a look at them, because even though they're not here, their books are great. And each one is totally different. Mur, she was going to be on the second panel, and she does this great series. She's from Durham, and we really miss her. A very humorous sci-fi mystery, outer space whodunits. We love them here. David Swinson, great series set in D.C. The best stories out of D.C. since George Pelecanos. And if you don't know who George Pelecanos is, come see me and I'll tell you who he is. And then Hannah Morrissey does this great series set in a downtrodden industrial city in Michigan. And it's a sort of a trilogy, but it's not. But it's all set in the same place, some of the same characters, but just quality. All 3 of them are quality, and we miss them. So I just wanted to share with you that they're not going to be here, but everybody else is here. We have all their books for sale over there. We also have CrimeScene t-shirts. They are available over at the bookstore. So that said, I'm just going to go ahead and do some, quick little things here. Like the one question that I know is on everybody's mind: where's the bathrooms? Over there. Over there. We do have on the back of our little program here, which you can find up in the front of the store or the barn, the schedule of events, and on the back is a QR code for the Belted Goat. So if you want to order lunch from the Belted Goat, you can do that, and they will text you when it's ready. To cut down on the Belted Goat being overrun, which very well could happen, we will be selling selected sandwiches, 3 different kinds, I think, over at the bar behind everybody. And there'll be $12 for the sandwiches and chips, $2 for drinks, and we have a lunch break starting at 12 o'clock. So, that said, each panel is going to be 45 minutes long, with a 15-minute break for signings in the bookstore. All the books are sale over here. For sale, the register is over in the far corner near the bar. So pile it up, head on over, get some books signed, and come back for more. I also want to say thank you to Sisters in Crime in the back. Also, Mystery Writers of America in the back. Some of their authors are here as well. Go and mingle with them. Let them tell you what they're doing. These are a lot of folks who, for some reason or not, we've probably carried some of them here for a while, and we just can't afford to keep them all the time. But it is wonderful to have them here. It's going to be fun to look at their stuff and, share with what they're doing. So again, I would just like to say thank you all for coming. CrimeScene is a big hit, and we will be looking forward to doing this again, hopefully maybe 2026. And so basically that's it for our opening remarks. Our first panel will be starting shortly, and enjoy. Thank you. I am technically deficient, so I'm just going to put it up. All right, we've got about 7-10 minutes until the panel starts. So feel free to talk among yourselves or go check out things, and Yeah. We will begin shortly. This is our first panel, and it is humor and homicide. You know, sometimes you just gotta laugh. And our panelists are Mark Streak right here, and he is the author of multiple series. And we have, I'm already screwing up. Things are only going to get worse. But he's the author of multiple different series, and his new series, which is set in DC, featuring an ex-FBI agent, the first female FBI agent, now retired and running a boarding house, is just fun as all get out. She is a tough little old bird who is a very deductive person and fun. So please, Mark Streak. Next to him is Wendell Thomas, and she's the author of the Sid Redondo series. And this is a travel agent who, if I ever get to retire, I would like to be my travel agent. She will take you around the world, she'll take care of all your messes, and you will laugh at the same time. Her latest one, Cheap Trills, takes you to Bali. And damn, that is a nice, beautiful country. You know, I travel vicariously through my writers. And boy, that was a great trip. And then at the end, we have Tim Mullaney. And he has written this great series. I get up here and I forget names. But his series, set in San Francisco, is a great chronology of San Francisco as a place. His main character is a former journalist, now a sort of PI, private PI, with his little sidekick, a young Chinese illegal immigrant who is the protectress of Chinatown. And between the two of them, they get into a lot of trouble. And what is always fun is that, much to the consternation of the police, at the end of every book there is an explosion which his main character is somehow involved in. And fun again. You know, these people will make you laugh. And our moderator is Sarah Johnson, and she is the author of the Alexa Glock series, which is all set in New Zealand. Again, a great place to travel vicariously. And all I can say is thank you all for being here. It's great to have you. And talk away and make us laugh. Cheers.
What an honor to be here with this panel, and humor and homicide. I mean, what a great combination. You know, a good plot is not based on things going well, but mainly based on things going all to hell. And when you add in some wry, humorous mishaps, I think it's the perfect blend. And these three authors just nail it. So we're going to talk for 35 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to you guys for some questions. So be thinking about what you want to ask these writers. I'm going to start with the first question, and I'm going to direct this question to Wendell, who, by the way, is a fellow Carolina graduate, whoop whoop. And when I read the opening of her latest, it's her fourth Sid Redondo travel book, Cheap Twills, I just laughed out loud from the first sentence. So I have to repeat that first sentence. Eat, pray, barf. It just killed me from the get-go. So I'm sure, how many of us read that book? Okay, Wendell. First question will be for Wendell, and then we'll and Mark and Tim can answer it too. Okay, so what's the secret of mixing mirth and homicide?
Can you all hear me? No, I'm not popping. Well, for me, I think like the murders are never funny, but it's all about what the character has to do to cope with what's happened. And so for me, it's all about making it as hard for her setting up a situation where the things that she's going to have to do to solve the murder, to cope with the killers, is going to be comically difficult. You know what I mean? So, for example, in Drowned Under, which was the second book, she has to go on a cruise ship, but she can't swim. So I try to do, in Cheap Thrills, the people in Bali think red-haired women are demons, and she has red hair. So I know it's going to be hard right away. So I just try to set up situations where the humor comes from her, not so much from the way the murders happen. I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Take
Yeah,
it.
somebody else jump in.
Well, I
what's
think
the secret?
I think the way you mix humor and murder is, when you look at humor, you can divide it into what's being said and what the situation is. And so the witty part comes in what's being said. The humorous, warm part are situations where you have to laugh along with whatever the situation is that's going on. And I primarily see the latter, the humorous situations, having to do with pacing in the book. Everything's not a car chase, everything's not a gunfight, but there are funny situations that are involved in the plot, but that kind of help pull things back a little bit, so then you can ramp up and head into the more dastardly action again.
Totally.
I think that's really key from the pacing standpoint. Also, what you said at the start, which is the plots in crime fiction are not based on things going well. They're based on things going horribly wrong. And any suspenseful book, it's like a roller coaster. And part of that is fun, and part of that is terrifying. I did a thing with another author in LA a couple of months ago, and we were talking to each other about our books. And he said, I heard this was a really funny book. That opening chapter was terrifying. And I don't think of myself as writing funny books, but after they're done, people say that was incredibly funny. And I think it just comes out on the page, because if you think about, we were talking about this last night, you think about the great sitcoms. Think about, like I Love Lucy, Lucy in the Chocolate Factory. That's not funny to her. It's funny to us, right? You think about Friends, you think about Seinfeld. And I was always attracted as a reader and inspired as a writer by people who just nail that combination of tension and the release of that tension, because you don't know how people are going to react under stressful circumstances. And a lot of criminals are not rocket scientists, so things are going to go sideways. We have Joe Lansdale here, who's one of the best writers in any genre on the planet. But if you've read the Hap and Leonard series, those books, when you think about them, you smile. There are moments when you laugh, but those are deadly serious stories, dealing with serious issues. So I was always inspired by that. And I think it just comes out. I think if you look at the world that way, and you have some characters who are knuckleheads, or things don't go as planned, things end up being funny, but I don't really think of it as, I think people who are trying to be funny rarely are.
Yeah, that rarely works.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, Tim, let me stick with you. Boy, the opening scene in Tim's book is still in my mind. It's just very cinematic, and I highly recommend Hanging with the Devil. So how does using humor help readers relate to your characters?
I think, again, it's like a decompression in the tension. It's getting I think what Mark said is right. A lot of it has to do with sort of the pacing, but also if you think about in real life, when you connect with people, right, humor is a great channel to empathy, right? Suddenly we've laughed together, or wow, they're human too. And I think it's important that the characters are fully fleshed out human beings, and how are you going to deal with that situation, and what they say and how they say it might strike the reader as funny. And in my case, I have one character she's incredibly focused. She is not messing around. She was orphaned as a young girl and raised as an assassin by the triads, and worked with the Tong gangs for a long time. Her partner, this private investigator, is more he's more stubborn than procedural, I'll just say, and a bit neurotic. So the combination of the yin and yang of those characters leads to some funny situations, because their reaction to how to handle a situation polar opposites, which is why I think things sometimes go sideways. And as Pete said, I tend to blow shit up at the end of the book. So there's usually, it's either a very elaborate Mexican standoff, or things just start blowing up. Yeah.
Wendell or Mark, you want to add to? Go ahead.
I think that humor in your character can make them endearing to you. humanizes it. It gives the character a way to deal with something that's horrid by stepping back a little bit and putting a little distance between what happened and what needs to happen from that point on. I like to think of the original Law and Order television show. If you remember, they always found a body in the first 2 minutes, and Jerry Orbach, who played Lenny, would make some cutting remark to punctuate and send it off that you realized it was caustic, but knowing him, you knew that he was going to see justice be done, and he could get away with making some comment like that. So I feel like the relationship, not only to the reader, to the characters with humor, but the characters between themselves, you learn something about. I also want to talk to the anti-humor people, because there are some characters that have no sense of humor, and that tells you a lot about them too, and they're usually not the good guys, so you can judge who's good and who's bad by, in my opinion, by who has the best sense of humor.
That's good. Wendell, anything to add?
I think that it seems to me, I mean, my other job, I teach screenwriting, and what I always find with romantic comedies is the moment that people finally get together is when they've achieved mutual embarrassment. And so I think if you have, the more your character can be in vulnerable human situations, and some of them are funny and some of them are, heartbreaking, but the more we can see ourselves, wind up in a wet toilet in Bali with no toilet paper, whatever it is, whatever it is, and we all are like, oh my God.
And wearing stilettos,
What?
may I add?
Whatever you can do to connect with your reader thinking, oh my God, if that happened to me, I would blank. Then somehow you get pulled in a little bit, because we've all been embarrassed somewhere, somehow, me daily. So, you just kind of, for me, that's part of my way in for her, I think.
I think that's that's a great way to pull the reader in. So Mark's latest book is Secret Lives, and his main character is the smartest woman in this room if she were here. She's 75 years old. Two of the things that just cracked me up is she's always disappearing into the basement to do her Ruth Bader Ginsburg workouts. That just cracked me up. And then she's always introducing her sort of sidekick as her, let's see if I can get this right, first cousin, second, twice removed, something like that. And
Nice try, nice effort.
Okay. I should have written it down. But anyway, the humor is wry in your books, but it is there. It's really good. So how about, what other purpose does humor serve in a mystery novel?
I think it brings out the sharpness of your character. If your character is sharp-witted, which Ethel is, she'll always have the last word. That should be appropriate, because this person is supposedly solving a crime, a complicated crime, and if they don't have sharp wits about them, literally witty dialogue, banter, whatever, I think that makes them more believable as a detective, quote, who's capable of doing that. I was going to tell a quick story about Ethel, where Ethel came from. I was flying back from Phoenix and sat beside a young woman on the plane and asked her if she was going to Charlotte, which is where I was headed, and she said, no, she's going to Charlotte to change planes to go to D.C. to visit her great aunt, who's 85 years old and who lives in the house she was born in, which I found interesting, because I don't know anybody who lives in the house they were born in, let alone in D.C. And I said, does some other family member live with her? And she went, no other family member, but she rents out rooms to FBI agents and Secret Service agents. Said, we don't worry about her because there's always somebody in the house with a gun. And that was kind of like, I saw her, that was a gift.
And
that was a gift.
And that's what Ethel does.
That was a hell of a gift. That was
Hope you're sharing your royalties. Okay, strong female characters in all three of these books. In Tim's book, we have Sally, who's a trained assassin, and we have this awesome 11-year-old girl who will just worm her way into your heart. And of course, with Wendo, we have Sid, from Redondo Travel, who, by the way, you should read this book this month because it's set in February, and for the first time, Sid is dateless on Valentine's Day. And then, of course, we have 75-year-old Ethel, who I'm not sure I really would want her as a friend, but let's speak to what makes your particular female character tick.
First, I think because this comes up all the time about strong female characters, like, yeah, of course. Like, my mom was a genuine badass, and she was a nurse and just incredible. Same with my wife, and I have two daughters. So it never even occurred to me, like, I'm going to write a damsel in distress and all of that. And back to the characters being fully fleshed out, it's what would a person, what would a human, what would this particular character do in these situations? And when I first started writing the books, I was interested in just bending the genre a little bit. So like my first novel got a lot of favorable comparisons to the Maltese Falcon because of the way it dealt with San Francisco. But I didn't want to have I've seen that PI archetype before, I've seen the sidekick or whatever, and I didn't even think of the Sally character as sidekick. It was more like I have two protagonists. And I wanted the toughest character in the book to be a 5-foot-tall woman, and I wanted her to be displaced and I wanted the collision of cultures. And one of the things that's interesting about San Francisco is people underestimate the size of Chinatown and how isolated part of that community is. So it is a world within a world. So I thought this notion of a detective who goes to that place and effectively is illiterate and can't communicate and can't connect, but then has to partner with this person who looks at the world completely differently was really interesting. And in her case, because she was orphaned at a very young age and then finds out later that that wasn't an accident, and she was effectively adopted, but then realizes she was sold to this school run by the Triads, and that came off an interesting stat. Not as I wish I'd had the gift marked guy on that plane, but I was reading this book, and it mentioned that like 60% of the world's assassins are female, and I thought that was really, really interesting because who better to get close to some people in power and whatnot. So I created this whole world and backstory for her, and once I had that, and that felt like a three-dimensional character, the other characters, which were the more, present-day, contemporary, moving in and around San Francisco, cops, PIs, things like that, that actually came easier. So she was the hardest character to crack, but she's the character that people seem to love and come back to. And then in this latest book, I introduced this 11-year-old girl because I thought about the crimes, and especially that opening scene with the helicopter heist at the museum. And I thought, okay, if there's a witness, who would that be? And I thought seeing that entire thing through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl would be really interesting, and it changes the dynamic of all the people in the book because of that girl. So that was incredibly fun to write, and it became very kind of moving for me because I hadn't done that before.
And I just want to say before I start talking about myself that that Tim's blow up of the museum is the best one ever since the Goldfinch. So if you have never read it, you have to read it.
So if you feel like trashing a museum, then you can do it vicariously through me.
He's your
Yeah,
guy.
exactly.
But,
I had pangs of guilt. I told Wendell last night about her destroying art, even though I'm just making shit up. But afterwards on that. So anyway.
Yeah. No. So anyway, there are kind of two things that I thought about creating Sid. I mean, she just kind of appeared to me once. I tell you honestly, I was sitting in a bar in Scotland, and all of a sudden I just saw this tiny woman in stilettos, and she's in the middle of the jungle, and she had bracelets, the kind you get in like a flea market, and they went all the way up her arm, like from here to here. And this guy came at her with a machete, and she just went, and she totally knocked him out. And I didn't know who she was, but later I found out. And so for me, first of all, I have a lot of my female friends I noticed have a lot of older brothers. There's something about what that does to women that's really interesting in terms of toughening them up and making them be able to be teased and also kind of, and Sid has 10 brothers, I call them, but she was the youngest of the youngest son, and all of her dad's brothers have boys. So she lived in a house with almost 11, like older brothers, cousins. So that makes her tough. But also, I wanted to find I think you always want to find, especially for comedy, you want to find a real conflict in someone's personality that they're constantly dealing with. And for me, she has like a crippling sense of responsibility for her clients, and she mostly represents senior citizen travelers, so she's really worried about them. But she also has, because she's been surveilled her whole life by these relatives, she has a really impulsive, rebellious streak. So those two things are always fighting in her, and almost any situation she's in, one of them is a problem. So I think it makes her stronger because she's constantly grappling with her own stuff, I think, anyway.
Yeah, great answer.
Well, when I got off the plane after stealing this fellow passenger's great aunt, I thought, I need to flesh her out more. And I had this image of Ethel Fiona Crestwater. I just wanted a name that sounded a little older. And I thought, who would she be patterned after? And I chose Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because I thought, there is a small package that's full of spirit and feisty, and I thought, what if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had been an FBI agent rather than a Supreme Court justice? So she had some things going for her. Obviously, she was very, very smart, very, very determined, very, very experienced as an agent, but she's a 75-year-old woman and underestimated. And people underestimate her at their own peril. And so that gives me a dynamic for the way she goes into the case, with an advantage of people not thinking she's going to have anything to contribute to the case.
Yeah, they totally underestimate her in the book. And the second cousin, once removed, says, I'll drive. And she's like, no, I'll drive. And then guess what she drives? A small plane. She's amazing. Okay, moving on. I'm going to save the writing question for later, but let's not forget we're mixing humor with homicide. So homicide is a dangerous, brutal act. How does it fit in with a humorous mystery? Mark, let's start with you.
Well, I think we were talking before in our correspondence, and I had thought of the Jimmy Buffett line.
That's right.
In Changes in Latitudes, Changes in Attitudes, where the lyric goes, if we couldn't laugh, we would all go insane. And I think part of what laughter does is put some sort of sense, or at least an antidote to the horridness of what the crime may be. And I think that's true. Outside of these walls, you see what's happening in the world today. You know, who wouldn't go insane? Because the world seems to be insane in so many ways, not only in our country, but across the planet. And so in some ways, if Jimmy Buffett's line is true, if we couldn't laugh, we'd all go insane, we have a responsibility in our books to put some humor in,
right.
to keep our readers from going insane. I don't know whether that's working or not, but that's how I feel like you mix the two together.
That's good. Wendell?
Well, I have a kind of, my books were inspired by films, actually, Romancing the Stone and Charade, and so I wanted that kind of capery, adventure feel, but all of my books are also deal with endangered species and wildlife crime, and so I hate preachy books, and so but I think this is such an important issue, and so I just decided to take the spoonful of sugar approach. You know, too much Mary Poppins in my youth, but I just feel like that somehow. And it's really funny because I went to see the wildlife crime prevention people at Scotland Yard, and I was really embarrassed. I'm like, I'm not doing a documentary. Can I talk to you? And when I said, I'm writing a beach book, and they were like, and they said, come on in, because they were like, those are the people that need to know that there are only 7 Bali starlings left in Bali. They're the people who need to know there are only 2 white rhinos left, you know? So for me, it's partly, as Mark said, just because I'm a humor fan, like I love comedy, but also because I do think sometimes a lot of times with nonfiction or documentaries, you're preaching to the converted, but to get the word out somehow else to people who might not normally watch Nova or something about these animals, I think for me, I feel that responsibility in a way.
I think that's incredibly true. Yeah, I think if you're writing about serious things, it's important not to take yourself too seriously, and I think to touch on what both Mark and Wendell said, reading should be fun. I mean, this is the if you look at the importance of books and, everybody here, there's nothing, books, TV, movies, that's the shared language that brings people together, and it shouldn't feel like a chore. It's more than an escape. I think if you look at Mark's comment about, whether it's the chaos of the world or what's happening in anybody's life or whatever, there's nothing more, palliative than opening a book and getting lost in the book. And for me, I always want to read books that are informative, suspenseful, exciting, but like that roller coaster, are entertaining. I want to, I might have been terrified during that first drop, but at the end of it, when I've gotten there, it's the let's go again kind of a thing. And so that's always been the kind of experiences I've reacted to viscerally, and those are the books that I think we're all trying to write.
Yeah. Well, let's dig a little deeper. Why do we have a room full of people? Why are people drawn to murder? What's the psychology behind that?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Just too many answers to that question.
Yes. Was there a metal detector at the door before I answer that? I should question.
Take a stab.
Yes, exactly. You'll all be questioned after this. I think that great fiction, and this is certainly true of mysteries, is what will ordinary people do under extraordinary circumstances. And I think whether it has to do with the social embarrassment that Wendell was talking about, or, oh my God, there's a dead body, or whatever, that we build, they've done these studies where the people who read fiction have more empathy, right? I think it's what would they do, what would I do, and that observation. So I think it's the ultimate test of the human condition. I would also say that all great literature is genre fiction. And I would argue it's all crime fiction. The Hobbit, yes, it's epic fantasy. It's a heist novel, right? It's basically Bilbo steals the ring. Gandalf is running a burglar operation. The whole thing. So the Greeks, those are all crime fiction. Shakespeare killed more people than Hannibal Lecter. So I think the human condition leads us towards our own mortality, and I think that's why crime fiction is great. So these people are just smarter than everybody else who isn't here.
Not to mention Pygmalion, the white trafficking.
Exactly.
What a great answer, gosh. Wendell or Mark, what would you add to that?
I think we've all wanted to murder someone, so I think that possibly has something to do with it.
Thank you for your honesty.
Sorry. Guilty as charged.
Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting, like anything else, I don't know if any of you ever read the Bruno Bettelheim, The Uses of Enchantment, but how fairy tales really help children deal with their deepest fears because they confront them. What if I get eaten by a witch? All of those things. So I think crime fiction for adults kind of helps them process fears. And it's interesting, my husband writes true crime, and he ran a true crime book club, and all the people were women. And it's really, it's really interesting because I think women live in fear all the time that something might happen to them. And so I think it also helps us try to understand that. So I think there are a lot of different levels on which it works. But I also think everybody wants to figure something out. And so I also think that if there's a crime, we like to participate in the be detectives ourselves. Everybody loves that a little bit, and it makes us feel smarter and more, just informed. So I think all of those things kind of factor into it, maybe.
Before Mark goes, raise your hand if you like to try to figure out the murder as you're reading.
Yeah.
Because there are some of us that don't really care who did it. We just like the story. So just throwing that out there. Mark, why are we drawn to
Well, I think
murder?
murder is the ultimate act against society, both as to the individuals and to groups of people. And so it's disruptive, and people normally don't like disruptive things. So I think human nature, you want to make things right, and that's what the mystery novel solves. It brings some, quote, order back to what's basically a disordered world. So I think murder in that case it draws us to it, and also we're all facing our own mortality. I mean, there's eventually nobody in this room gets out of this planet alive, and I think that's sort of maybe a vicarious fascination with what's happening with death, and that's underlying not only our murder mysteries, but most great fiction deals not only with life, but deals with death as well.
I am so glad I asked that question. They were some great answers. You know, I wish I'd taken notes up here. Well, let's talk about the writing process. I'll start with you, Wendell. Do you plot? Do you pants? What's your writing process like?
I'm a complete pantser, and I will admit this. I admitted this to Tim last night, and please don't tell anyone. Although,
now you're telling everyone.
All 4 of my books, I wrote the last 10 pages the day it was due. I can't write it before that. I don't know what happens. And those are the only pages on which I never get any notes, which is hilarious to me. But for these books, I start with a place because I have to figure out the place determines the crime, right? So, because it's all animal related, so, you know, my Australian one is the thylacine and the Bali starling in Bali. So I have to find the place and then the crime, and then I have to find a few things that I think will be funny for Sid. So, for example, there is an underground Tupperware network in Bali, and also with the red-haired demon thing. So honestly, in that term, as soon as I found those things out,
you can't make this stuff.
No, well, I was going to say, pardon my language in this genteel environment, but that shit writes itself. You know what I mean? Like, you can't. That's so good. But and then I have a few things I know I want to get to, like I said, and she's got to fall off the cruise ship if she can't swim. Like, there's certain things that have to come. But otherwise, I kind of just go. And then I make sure I have a midpoint. My midpoint's my most important thing, actually. And then, and I have to get her out of town, out of Brooklyn, and those things. And then I pretty much go, but I have to do a lot of rewriting. That's the pantser's curse, But she talks to me, so that helps.
Yeah, you mentioned in a Facebook post when I responded to something that she channels through you.
Yeah, she won't shut up, so it's good.
Mark, what's your process?
Pray. Look at the calendar and see the days going by. No, I'm a seat of the pantser too, and I usually start with some kind of an inciting incident that I don't know where it's going to go beyond that. But in the case with Ethel, in the first Ethel book, one of her roomers, her boarders, is shot dead on her front lawn in the middle of the night. So she has a personal reason for getting involved. I didn't know exactly where we were going after that, but I had this scene, and her young relative, her only living relative, is her double first cousin twice removed.
You're so close. You're so close.
And in this opening scene, he sees Ethel go into FBI mode in a way that just bewilders him. He had not seen it before, and so I knew once I had that chemistry going, then you would take it into where you felt the characters were leading you. Like you say, there's a lot of flying by the seat of your pants mean there's a lot of rewriting. Yeah. There's also a lot of unwriting, because I can go down a rabbit hole and a dead end, and I thought, and I've made it tough for the character. How are we going to solve this mystery? I have no idea. And so you back out and go and take it another way. But that makes it fun. That also, I think, makes the writing more spontaneous.
Yeah.
That I don't do a heavy outline, because then that seems like I'm just putting the pieces in together rather than letting it organically arise from the moment in each part of the book.
Yeah, and being open to veering off in new ways.
Very similar. A lot of procrastination, a lot of neurotic, moments of what am I doing? Like Mark, for me, the inciting incident is really important. So like in Hanging the Devil, that museum heist, that opening, I must have thought about that and played with that for almost 9 months. I rewrote it like 40 times because once I had that anchored, then you're telling yourself a story, and then you're just going. And then I don't know the halfway point for me. It's about a third of the way in. If I can get like 100 or so pages in, I stop and do a retroactive outline to almost map because my books are written in third person close, so to map the appearance of the character, to make sure that I don't want to have somebody show up here and then you don't see them far enough away that you lose the connection. So that helps me get the rhythm or the melody of the voices in my head. And then I just go back and keep writing from the seat of the pants after that. But it is like telling yourself a story. Like when my daughters were younger, they were absolute masters. I think I learned it from them, where I would tell them a bedtime story and they'd say, I want a story with the dragon or Peter Pan or whatever. And you'd come, you'd think to a satisfactory ending of, okay, and then they caught the witch. And then I would hear this little voice in the dark, and they both did this and say, but the voice was really a robot controlled by another witch. And here I am, and I'm telling the story, and I'm like, she is? And then as a parent, you're shit out of luck because no one's going to bed. So then you have to keep telling the story. So my wife would sometimes get frustrated because the 10-minute bedtime story would, like an hour later, why are you guys still talking? And she was 100% right. So it was like, okay, I have to get off story detail because this is just too damned interesting. So
That's great. I took a James Patterson masterclass, and he is a real big outliner. So I'm like, okay, book 3. I spent like 3 months outlining, just outlining. And, a quarter of the way through the book, that outline was in the trash can. Yeah. So it's even if you think you're going to be a plotter, you might not be a plotter. But is it time for us to have questions from the audience for our panelists?
Before
Yes.
Juliet gets to ask a question, because I know she's a saboteur, I just want to say the most noble thing a writer can do for other writers is moderate a panel like this, and Sarah is an unbelievable writer. And her books are from opening to close utterly delightful, so you didn't answer your own questions, but read her books.
Very nice.
So.
Thank you.
Oh, hold on. Julia, hang on. We have the microphone for you.
Get him white.
Thank you. I would like to ask you about zeitgeist and perception. So over the time that you've been publishing humorous crime fiction, have you noticed a shift in readers, reviewers, publishing professionals, an attitude toward funny crime fiction, either taking it more seriously as a literary genre or seeing it more viably as a commercial product? Are we better or worse on this genre than we were 10, 15 years ago? And why?
I'd love to know what you guys think. I have kind of a mixed answer. I do think that it gets back to, in a way, what Mark was saying about the characters, like, beware of someone with no sense of humor, right? I think there's always people in the reviewing crowd and in the so-called literary crowd who just take themselves too damn seriously and don't get they think of publishing as, is this suspenseful, is it funny, is it romantic? And it's like, well, life is all of those things, so why not that? But I've definitely seen some reviewers and a lot of readers, because again, it's supposed to be, entertaining, get that. So I think there's been more appetite for that, and it's changed a lot. I mean, you think about the late and amazing Elmore Leonard. A lot of the people who were readers loved him for many years, and he didn't get the critical attention he deserved. And then suddenly, it had that ripple effect, because I think there's a lot of they said that, it must be true within the reviewing community. And everybody recognized the man was a genius, but it took 40 years. So I think there's definitely opening to that, because you're seeing more of it in some movies and television, in terms of them playing around with that with some directors like Guy Ritchie and the guys who did Bullet Train. You wouldn't have seen that even 10 years ago. That would have been an action movie, but it wouldn't have had as many smiles to it. So I think it's opening up a little bit, but I think there's still some people out there who are kind of tone deaf. What do you think?
Yeah, when I first wrote Lost Luggage, which is the first book, no one knew what to do with it. I got an agent, but she wanted it to be a cozy, and it wasn't a cozy, so she never sent it out. So I actually sold it myself. And because it's really like a screwball mystery, and that's not a category. But I do think now they're way more TV shows and movies that are back in that capery
Yeah.
area. Poker Face, Knives Out, Only Murders in the Building. There's more comedy mysteries kind of out in the world. So I think, and I've noticed that there are more younger writers now that are writing kind of what I've been doing, you know, a little more in that comedy,
Irreverent, yeah.
zany area. So I do think there's some more, but I think it's always going to be hard. And we were talking about this last night, but I think the thing is when you write, like I'm writing a comic mystery, like both of you are not so much straight comedy, but mine really is. It's always risky because everybody doesn't have the same sense of humor. And so it's harder to sell sometimes because all you need is one editor who doesn't think Eat, Pray, Barf is funny. And you're dead, do you know what I mean? And so it's always, writing comedy is always a tricky thing because you have to try to write on like 5 different levels of comedy to try to get everybody. So I think it's harder, it can be harder, it's always gonna be harder to sell in some ways.
Everyone, a good moderator knows to keep time, and we're already over time,
Oh, God.
aren't we?
Oh, no, Mark.
Are we okay, Pete?
We're good for a couple more.
Okay, great. Couple more questions?
Sorry, Mark, you shouldn't
All right, well, if we're okay,
Yeah.
let us send our authors over to the bookstore to sign some books for everybody who's interested. And yeah, first panel. Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks,
that was
everyone.
wonderful. Man, awesome. What a great start. So yeah, we do have books for sale over here, and we'll answer any questions you have. We will be back here in about 15 minutes or so to start with our second panel. Thank you.
Well, it's always good because we turn these around.
Yeah.
We got a real fun one up here this time. I mean, well, the last one was great too, but this one's a little bit different. This one we are calling the morphing of genres. How change is good. And basically this is looking at the influence of, you know, horror, sci-fi on the mystery genre and how it's all kind of changing a little bit. And our panelists are Thomas Mullen, who's written a great series of books, a trilogy set in Atlanta, which is a straightforward police procedural kind of thing. And he's here for his book, Blind Spot, which is a totally different thing than anything he had done before. And it was quite good. And basically it's about a plague where everybody goes blind. But there's like so much more to it than that. We also, I should say, have for sale over there at the tables his new book that is coming out next month. And his publisher was kind enough to let us go ahead and sell it early. And it is a historical novel set in 1943 Boston. So again, totally different. Thomas?
Special advanced version. I myself hadn't even seen the book until yesterday, so it's,
Wow.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to give it to him, to show it to him. But yeah, Thomas does not sit on his laurels. He's like, he wants to try different things. It's wonderful. And with him is Juliet Grams. And she is the executive publisher of Soho Press. And she's here to talk from her experience as an editor and what she's seen over the years. You know, as she's seen, you know, going from, like, say, straightforward narrative mystery and so on to, you know, this slowly morphing of. And our third panelist who can't make it today, Mur Lafferty, oh my God, I can't say enough good things about her books. You know, outer space sci-fi, you know, great outer space whodunits. So anyway, here are our panelists. Our moderator is J.G. Grant Heatherton, and he is one of our locals. And his last book that he did was one of our Belty Prize nominees from roughly 2 years ago. And it is so good to have you here. It's good to have you both here. And let's get right to it. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. Pete Mock, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I am a Belty Prize nominee. Yes, I was snubbed. No, I'm not bitter about it. And I wanted to point out, though, really quick, that Juliet, because I wrote little Pete did a little intro, but I wrote a little intro for you. And my intro for you included something else, which is that your second novel, The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia, is coming in July from Knopf. And I think that that is a historical mystery. Am I right?
Yeah.
Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
I wonder if you both would just give us a quick overview of your books that we're going to be talking about today, Blind Spots and that. Is that okay?
Sure.
Give it to me.
Of our new books?
Yeah, give me.
So Blind Spots, which Pete talked about a little bit, that is sort of set kind of in today's world, but it's a slightly futuristic book. It's sort of inspired by books or movies like Minority Report or Blade Runner or Children of Men. So it's mostly like our world, but just a little bit different. But the twist is that imagine that we all went blind and nobody's really sure why it happened, but it happened. And so there's a brief moment of terror and worldwide blindness, but then luckily technology saved us. We all have these little implants in our temple actually that just downloads visual data directly to our brain. So it's like we can see again. Yay, everything's fine, right? It's sort of, instead of your eyes giving you the data, it's this little device streaming there. But somebody figures out how to hack it. So somebody is committing murders while blacked out of everybody else's vision. They look like a human censored bar. And that was the idea behind the book. I got that idea somewhere and I was like, this sounds like fun. And I just kind of ran with it.
It is fun. I can confirm it's very fun. Juliet.
Yeah, I am a book editor. I've been at Soho for 15 years, and I get to curate the crime list there. So I'm here today to talk about my editorial work and my thoughts thematically on where genres cross over. When I came into Soho, there was a very prescribed editorial vision for what we did. It was international mysteries or thrillers featuring native protagonists, no supernatural elements. These should be traditional procedurals, and that's still a powerful piece of what we do. Some of our bestsellers include like Sujata Massey's series set in 1920s Bombay, or Cara Black's series set in Paris, and these are New York Times bestselling bread and butter crime fiction series for us. But I'm very interested in genre, and as a reader, I have always loved fantasy is my secret, what I read, and a lot of sci-fi as well. And I've noticed over the last 10 years or so a shift in what we can talk about in the crime genre in terms of what is a crime novel and how genre crossover has happened with books like Blind Spots and other fantastic reads. So that's been really interesting to me to watch. And as a writer, I write historical fiction set in Italy. That's like my jam. So, but I draw very heavily on my fantasy reading when I think about writing, because in fantasy, there's a contract with the reader where you have to build a world. It's not the world the reader lives in. So you need to give them all of the details that make them buy your outlandish premise. And I love fantasy writers for doing that. And the thing is, I believe every writer should actually be doing that. Not just fantasy. So why are we not spending more time and energy on world building like that? So I think about that a lot as a historical fiction writer. And I hope we get to talk about that a little bit too, about how we deploy those different genre contracts and what we do.
Well, that makes me think of so many questions. Well, number one thing I wanted to ask you, we're in a room full of readers, everyone who came out to a book event. What was your first love? Tell me about your first love. Maybe yours is fantasy, but I would love to hear Thomas's as well.
For me, it was mysteries. I was talking to somebody about this last night. I love the Spencer novels set in Boston. I'm originally from Rhode Island. And so
My man.
Yeah, what's that?
My man.
Yeah. So, the Spencer novels are set in Boston, just about an hour from where I grew up. And so, they're classic private eye stories. Like, he's not breaking any mold or reinventing anything, but they're just really, really well done. The character is really sharp and witty. Like people were talking about earlier, you want to have sharp-witted, smart protagonists, and Spencer is that. And his sidekick Hawk, which he bears in some of the books, was another great character. And it was just, they were just really enjoyable books to read. And I was talking earlier with you about Stephen Mac Jones, a great writer in Detroit, and I've been really enjoying his novels. They remind me of the Spencer novels, like a really good PI story where you just love hanging out with a person. You'd want to follow them even if they weren't solving a crime, but fortunately they are solving a crime, which makes it even more exciting. So those were the first books that I really, really got into. And I mean, I've wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember, like since before that, like since the Hardy Boys probably. But that was probably the first like series aimed at adults that really I was obsessed with.
What was your first fantasy?
My first love was fantasy for sure. So my dad read me The Hobbit when I was 4, which was completely inappropriate. And then we just read my 4-year-old son The Hobbit, and he loved it too. So whatever, it's fine. But yeah, thank you, Tim, for characterizing it as a heist novel and a burglary caper, because yes, it is in fact crime fiction. That is a great point. My first crime fiction love, which I came into via the BBC, was Brother Cadfael. Yeah. So I watched the short TV series, and then I started reading those books when I was like 10 or 11. Again, not appropriate, but I just love historical as well. I think there is some speculative overlap between historical fiction and speculative fiction. So
Before we talk about overlap, when I was thinking about what to talk about with this panel, I thought the first thing we have to talk about is, does anyone want to take a shot at defining genre? What is it? Oh, we've got one. Want somebody who's ready to go.
I'm glad you do, because I totally do not. I'm not even going to try.
I would love, Julia, please take the reins.
Oh God, no, I love this conversation. So it's a contract. So a genre reader is more self-aware than a reader who does not describe themselves as a genre reader. But I bet you that they like the same books, right? So a genre reader knows that they want a specific experience from their reading, and they will tend to select books that promise them that experience. They will often read beyond that, but the contract is something that's sacred to them. So the easiest, most straightforward one here is romance. Romance is a safe space for the reader. The contract is a happy ending. If you are a romance reader, you know you are safe inside this book because you're going to get a happy ending, and the caper along the way will entertain you. I respect romance readers, but I don't want to know there's a happy ending. I want to be stressed out about whether the ending's going to be happy or not, which is why I don't read as much romance as I read other genres. However, that reader is a legitimate reader, and that contract exists, and that's why that genre is so successful. It's probably the strictest, too. You're not going to publish a romance novel where they don't get together at the end or where everybody gets murdered. That doesn't happen. So less strict contracts exist in let's talk about crime fiction, because that's why we're here. And I think Megan Abbott has this spectacular piece that she did with LitHub, an interview where she really nails down what crime genre is, noir versus hard-boiled, or what are we looking for in crime? We're looking for discomfort. We're looking for a world where things are bad, where there is injustice, and we're looking for a path toward justice, however broken that may be, right? And I think that that's the thing about crime fiction. We want to look at darkness, and we use darkness as a branch of hope to see how darkness can be prevented, how it can be rejustified, or to look at the world around us and say, well, at least that darkness doesn't exist here. There's a range there, but we're actually, part of our contract is the discomfort, right? And then I think I'll give fantasy, the contract there, like I said, is about world building. A fantasy novel fails if you don't believe in this world that doesn't match yours. So, right, there's your articulated contracts, some of them. But I will say that the best books, like the ones that sustain, like The Hobbit, for example, they are fulfilling the contracts of more than one genre. They are giving you the darkness, they're giving you the hope, they're giving you the adventure, they're giving you the world building. And I want to make the argument, I could tell you why any book is a crime novel, but I also want to make the argument that, you as readers of genre are reading the best literature, and anyone who poo-poos genre because they think that it's less or that it's not great literature, they're just very not educated. They need to do some more.
Hear, hear. Yeah, I'd never thought of it as a contract, but I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because I've always been attracted to books that kind of straddle genre lines. Like as a reader, I like books that kind of mix it up. So I like to read those books, and I end up writing books that are like historical and crime, or crime and speculative. I don't like plan that. I don't sit down and think I'm going to combine these genres for this next book. I just get an idea that happens to combine elements. But there's always a risk that some readers aren't going to like that. I can read some online reviews, and I can tell this person just wanted straightforward crime, and they didn't like the fact that there was a magical element, or they didn't like the fact that there was a futuristic thing. So I love that kind of work, but you run the risk that you're going to maybe alienate one fan base or another when you mix things up.
What about you, Grant?
Well, I was going to say that makes me wonder if you put yourself in a position where you're going to have to fulfill more than one contract. It makes me think about, a wave interfering with itself. In some places, it's going to reinforce. In some places, it's going to cancel each other out. They could build each other up, or you can create like real tension between the promises that you're sort of making.
Yeah.
Where do you think those sort of tension points lie between? I'll take, you can name any combination of genres where you want to talk about that.
There's something deeply troubled in this, though, which is the idea that art should initiate from the artist, and it should be created purely without thoughts about the consumer, because art is not a product, right? And it shouldn't be driven toward a commercial product presentation. So I think that may actually be a piece of why genre will get denigrated, is because it's thought of as a commercial product instead of as an art piece. Sure. I want to make the argument that literature can't be judged the way other art can, because it's such a long piece of construction to write a book. It's not like you're going to paint a single painting that will then be sold to one consumer. And there are teams of people involved, and you spend many years within a story, and it's a relatively low price point object. So if there was only one consumer of your book, it would fail, right? It doesn't work. So I think that pretending that there is no product aspect to literature is fake, right? So thinking about a reader and a reader's needs isn't cheap, but the art is really important too. So like walking that bridge where you're creating the piece of art that you want, that interests you and fascinates you, where also there's a readership for it. That's the dream.
I mean, I think as a writer, yeah, I mean, it's funny, we're throwing around words like contract and consumer and stuff. Making it sound very businesslike and clinical. I just like to write. It's fun. I mean, in the back of my mind, I am always thinking about the reader. Like, yeah, like I'm not talking about art for art's sake, or people that just like, I want to do whatever I want to do. I mean, as a writer, I'm always at least thinking about the reader, because I maybe want to trick the reader. I want to mislead you. I want to move you. Like, one of the fun things about art is you can never really predict what the reader's going to take out of it. Now, I'll have people say things to me about something they took from one of my books, and I'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't mean that at all, but cool, that's great. Like, that's art, it's magic. Like, you all have different life stories and worldviews than I do, and so certain things that I write are going to resonate with you in ways that I can't predict. And that's especially true, like, if a book is translated, it's in another country, it's being read by people very different than myself. Like, that's just one of the exciting, fun things about art, is that unpredictability, that magic. But at the same time, I am thinking about the reader. I'm thinking, like, am I going to bore them in this section? Is this too much? Should I bring this twist sooner? Like, you try not to be super self-conscious about it. You do want to let the art flow and the magic happen. But I'm also thinking, okay, like, at what point am I going to lose them, and that sort of thing.
Do you think of blind spots as, is the primary genre speculative, or is it crime fiction to you?
I don't know.
Putting them on the spot.
It's a good question. I mean, I probably, describe it first as a crime novel, because my previous 3 novels were crime novels. Darktown, Lightning Men, and Midnight Atlanta. It's a series set in Atlanta starting in 1948 about the segregated police force at that time. And they're following black cops and white cops trying to solve crimes in this crazy, crazy era. So because my previous 3 books have been crime novels, the new book, Blind Spots, there's a murder in it, so okay, I guess it's a crime novel again, but it's also set in this kind of weird future, so maybe it's speculative. Ultimately, these are just kind of like marketing terms, or they're words that bookstores need to know which shelf to put it on, or that your publicist needs to know so they know which person to call at the newspaper who might want to review the book. It's more their problem than mine. I'm kind of creating problems by jumping around. Like, I can just write what I want to write, and it's fun, but I acknowledge the fact that it sometimes makes my publishers or my publicists or my editors' life a little difficult. But it's just sort of what happens.
I agree. They have to know where to put the books on the shelves in the store, and so genre was invented. Yeah. It's not a real construct. And when Pete asked me to do this, I think that of course, was very pleased, but then I found out what it was, and I chafed against the topic a little bit, because I do think I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about genre, and the idea that some fiction is lowbrow and some fiction is highbrow, because I do think, now this is going to sound, we're going to get a little sappy, but that books are special. And the reason I think that they are special is that there's so many other forms of art that do not require the participation that a book requires from the reader. That the reader is an essential part of a book. That you can put a movie on and then leave the room and it keeps playing. Yeah. But the book needs you. That it's like an inert object with black squiggles until somebody picks it up and reads it. Is something that I really believe. And that's, I think, probably a lot of other people in this room have had that magical experience from the reader end, that you get this sort of participatory two minds meeting across time, space, 3,000 years, it doesn't really matter, that you can do that you can't do with other forms of art. We did First Loves. Oh, I did have one important question. This is a process question. The process question is, I can't help notice Thomas and I are both wearing our writer blazers.
I love blazers. I love blazers. I don't get enough excuses to wear my blazers. So,
I was sitting next to Joe Lansdale. He's doing the other version, the leather jacket. That's cool too. The bad boy. Of fiction.
That's more crime fiction writer, I need to get
We're doing
jacket.
I call this one The Professor. Yeah. It's fun too.
Well, I read A Hell of a Book, which is a great book, won the National Book Award 2 or 3 years ago. It's about an author on book tour, and he talks about, like, I got to go buy a blazer because, writers have to have blazers. And I was like, well, yeah, I love blazers, totally.
But I want to ask the question everyone's wondering, are you wearing the blazer when you're doing the writing? And if not, what are you wearing?
I have probably
What's your writing outfit?
never worn a blazer when I've written. It's a little, it's not quite as comfortable.
It's not right. What are we doing? I'm doing full sweats. I'll go first. It's all sweats all the time, of course.
Same.
All right.
I've never been asked about attire when writing before. That's interesting. That's a first. Good job.
Yeah.
Good job.
I try to keep it fresh.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had for you guys was also, because we are talking a little bit about if a genre is sort of a set of conventions and rules that go along with it that you then have to either follow, or then when you break them, you're breaking it because the rule exists. It's sort of making a statement. Why do this to yourself? Why choose to blend two genres? I think it's hard enough. My books are straight mysteries. I think that's hard enough. I find that pretty difficult to write. Why choose to take that challenge on? What is driving that decision?
Well, again, there are times when I wonder if maybe it's a bad idea, if that'd be easier to market, and if more books would sell if I just wrote police murder mysteries straightforward. And I have nothing against them. I read plenty of books like that and love them. I think for me, it's just, again, I just get ideas that way. So it probably started with my second novel, The Many Deaths of the Firefly Brothers. That's about a pair of bank robbers during the Great Depression who realize that they can be killed, but they always wake up the next day and they're fine and they keep going and they're not sure why. And the idea for that came about because I wanted to write a book about bank robbers during the Great Depression. I'd read a few, true crime stories about, Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde and Pretty Boy Floyd. I thought it was fascinating, and I wanted to write a book in that time. Also, it's partly autobiographical. My family went through a really hard time financially when I was younger. My dad had financial troubles and legal troubles, and we lost our house. It was really, really difficult, and I wanted kind of to find a way to write about that, but in an exciting way. And I thought the Great Depression era bank robbers offered me that opportunity. But whenever I sat down to write it, I wrote a couple of bank robbery scenes, and they just felt like scenes that we had all read or seen before over and over again. We've seen bank robbery scenes on TV shows and movies. We've read bank robbery scenes in books. And so the scenes that I wrote, they were perfectly fine, but they just lacked that pop of originality and so it just wasn't working for me. And at one point I was just thinking about the legends that surrounded people like Dillinger. He broke out of jail. He did these really amazing things. But then the legend of him grew even beyond him. He was considered the thief no jail can hold. And I thought, well, what if there were bank robbers that death itself could not hold? What if the first scene of the book is they're on the cooling boards in a police headquarters and they look down and they see all these bullet wounds, but they feel fine and they have no memory of what happened last night, but they're like, are you good? Yeah, I'm good. Want to get out of here? Yeah. And then they peel off. I didn't really know where I was going with that, but finally I had a new way into the story. So I think maybe the reason I combine genres sometimes is it gives me a new way to get into the story. It gives me a story that doesn't feel like one I've read before. And for me, that's what excites me, and that's kind of what gets the gears turning.
I will like to answer this question as an editor, if that's okay.
That would be wonderful.
I'll tell you about, just anecdotally, a couple experiences with authors I've worked with. Actually, Pete and I pre-talked this through because he has some favorites from the Soho list that are genre crossovers. So one of them is an author named Chris McKinney who wrote a series called Midnight Water City is the first book. And it's set in a futuristic Hawaii in like the 2140s. And the premise is that the Earth was nearly hit by an asteroid, and this incredible scientist figured out how to destroy the asteroid. So she's like the savior of humanity. And now it's a couple decades later, and she's been like brutally murdered. So the story is, and it's Water City is Hawaii, and so it's a sunken world because of climate change. And the detective, it's like this is a noir beat cop who has to figure out this grotesque murder, but it's in a world where climate has changed, research has changed. And so for Chris is Hawaiian. He wanted to explore Hawaiian identity. He also wanted to explore climate change, which is super important, I think, especially for all of us. But if you're living in Hawaii, it's a day-to-day thing you're thinking about. And so for him, taking a speculative story, but also putting it within a comfortable crime fiction story that he knew he wanted to tell, that was a method for him. And I would describe that as a sci-fi crime crossover. And the other two I'm going to talk about are both horror crime, which is incredibly a burgeoning genre for us, to the point that we're actually launching a horror imprint this summer to kind of distinguish a little bit, because we've had so much reader attention for horror crossover. But one of them is an actually National Book Award nominee called Shudder that we published 2 years ago. And it's a story of a Navajo forensic photographer who can see ghosts. And so the story is told between these very real world investigations, crime scenes, very gruesome crime scenes, and then this detective solving the cases. But the interstitials are her growing up on the reservation in Tohatchi, New Mexico, and the coming of age story of like learning about being Diné, being Navajo in the modern world. But ghosts become such a powerful way to describe that experience. And so when Ramona Emerson, the author, was writing this, she is a former forensic photographer. She's now a cinematographer, but she worked the crime scene beat for 16 years. And she was like, it's true, I've got this stuff to say, but it's so dark. I want something that will help make this, accessible for other readers. And in fact, she introduced speculative fiction as a sort of softening way to take, ghosts are less scary, I think, than what people really do to each other. So it's a way to receive the reality of the New Mexico crime scene, which is fascinating. The last one is Stuart Neville, who is a Northern Irish writer, and his debut, The Ghosts of Belfast, is a post-IRA hitman released from jail who is haunted by the ghosts of the people he murdered, and you sort of never know, is it wet brain, is it his guilt, are there actual ghosts? And from the beginning, Stuart, he adores Stephen King. He adores that genre. It's what he grew up reading, and he wanted to write it, but he's like, no one but Stephen King can do this. And I do think that there has been a zeitgeist changed in genre. And so when he was shopping that book in 2007 or 2008, people didn't want the magic, they didn't want the speculative aspect, they weren't into it. It's like, if you're not Stephen King, don't touch it. So he wrote in real world crime fiction for a long time. And lately he's like, hey, you know what? I've written 9 books, I'm gonna do what I want. And he broke out into horror with a really amazing book called House of Ashes, which is about an actual case in Northern Ireland, a mass murder that he turned into sort of a locked room horror / speculative ghost mystery. And so I think those are all reasons, like market pressures to blend or not blend, finding a path into the story to make it more accessible to a reader,
But no, I'm glad you mentioned Stephen King. That's a really good point. I think part of it is like generational. Like our generation, we were raised on like Stephen King and Star Wars and, tons of Hollywood movies, in a way that maybe writers in the 50s, 60s weren't. And so we were just exposed to different types of stories. And so when we get ideas in our heads, the odds are greater that it's going to combine different elements like that. So I think people like Stephen King or Star Wars, they just had such a huge influence on our childhoods, on our upbringings, and just the way we think of stories.
And I was going to say, very funny that in that period, I feel like Stephen King did jump ship and move over to some straight mysteries.
And
they
straight
sort of,
fantasy.
yeah, two ships kind of crossing in the night a little bit. What do you think? Are there any other, a little bit of an editorial question, but I'm sure you've got an opinion about this too. Are there any other trajectories that you're seeing within genres, whether they're crossing over, or what is up and coming right now? What do you think the next sort of pattern we should be on the lookout for is?
Horror, for sure. Horror is so huge.
Yeah.
We can't control it. There's a deep desire for horror. There's also a deep desire for romance. We don't publish romance at Soho, but I would say both of these trends are coming out of are sort of our reality shifts over the last 10 years. But I'm very, very interested in the space that you sit in, actually, with Blind Spots, because crime, I would say, crime fiction, mystery/thriller readers and science fiction, fantasy readers are maybe the least touched by the changes that are happening. And it's been this place where some of the best books of all time sit in that space, but they have a discomfort with one or the other. And are we tagging this as a mystery thriller? Are we tagging? Can we just source who here feels like they're a mystery thriller genre reader? Probably everyone, right? Okay. So who here feels like they're also a sci-fi fantasy reader? Okay, so some people.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, I'm curious, of the people who think of themselves as mystery thriller readers, not the others, you guys don't get to raise your hands, who here has read an author named China Miéville?
Oh yeah, The City in the City.
So yeah,
Awesome
so
book.
this is what, so he is a speculative writer, and he wrote a mystery called The City in the City, which is one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. And it is a mystery novel, and most mystery readers that I encounter have never heard of it, or they haven't read it because it's speculative fiction. It's certainly speculative fiction. And I think that there is a conversational crossover that's not happening between these two groups because they're so well established and because they have such passionate and devoted readers. But like Blind Spot, I mean, that's why I asked you, like, where do you feel this should sit? Is it spec/mystery, or is it mystery/spec? And I know your publishers had to make a decision, and
I guess, again, I don't know. Like, I don't really care what shelf they put it on, just so long as it's on a shelf,
Right.
and just so long as people are reading it. That's ultimately what matters. I just want people to read the book. But so I'm probably more likely to call it crime fiction because more people, I think, know what crime fiction is. They're like, oh yeah, I like crime, I'll read that. Whereas if I describe it as it's speculative crime, a lot of people are gonna be like, what the hell does that mean? Like, last night somebody asked me, what does speculative mean? And there's a funny quote, like Margaret Atwood would refer to some of her books as speculative, like The Handmaid's Tale and the what was it, Oryx and Crake, the Mad Adam series, because they're set sort of in the not so distant future. She called it speculative fiction. Then Ursula Le Guin, who's always written fantasy and sci-fi, said, well, speculative fiction is just what snooty literary authors call it when they write sci-fi. And there's a lot of truth to both of that. I think what Le Guin is saying is right on. Like Margaret Atwood probably didn't want to say she was writing sci-fi because sci-fi gets looked down on, and she's this literary author, so she didn't want to say I write sci-fi, so she says speculative. But Le Guin's also right. Like, what's the difference? Like when somebody like Margaret Atwood writes sci-fi, it's still sci-fi. It's just, it's not like it feels different. Like maybe it's really well written sci-fi, but people that say speculative is better have the false impression that sci-fi is badly written. Like, are there badly written sci-fi stories? Are there badly written crime stories? Sure, but there's badly written everything. It's, it's not the genre that matters, it's how you do it.
I think that this is about the time when we might take a few questions, if anyone has a question. Nobody? I'll keep going. We got one over here.
They were slow, but we got some hands
Oh, we got some over here.
Nobody wanted to be the first, but they got it.
I pick you because Pete is closest to you.
It's probably not really a question, but you were talking about contracts and how the happy ending thing. Well, for me, because I read a lot of these different genres, for me it's about the puzzle, and I know there's going to be a solution at the end. And you had mentioned specifically about red herrings and things that you threw in. The books I hate are the books that in chapter 2, I know who did it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
For me, the thrill is in thinking. I read for a while, and then I stop and I think through and go back and try to piece it all together. My husband's the complete other way around. He doesn't even do that. He just likes the story, and he'll just read it through without ever stopping to think about it. But for me, it's about the puzzle, and that really crosses a lot of these genres. Like, Blade Runner, a lot of puzzle in there, and stopping and thinking and trying to figure it out. And so for me, that's the contract I'm looking for.
Could people hear her in the back? No, okay. Yeah, I think I agree. But sometimes as a writer, you want to have a slightly ambiguous ending, and that can be risky because I don't want people to feel cheated. But sometimes an ambiguous ending is really exciting and fun because you can kind of think in different directions. But I don't want it to be like so ambiguous that they're going to feel cheated. Because you're right. It's like I want to know who done it. Don't leave me hanging. That's kind of important. Yeah, it's like I just read a novel. Tana French. I just read her first novel. It's great. And there's a couple
A little bit of a horror crossover with that one, I think.
Yeah,
In the
there's
Woods
a
has
couple
horror
of mysteries
vibes.
in her first book, and one of them is definitely solved. The other one's a little ambiguous, but it works. You know, it's like, so you got to be careful. But yeah, when it's done well, it's a lot of fun.
We had one here. We got one over here, Pete.
Here we go. Can we pass it down?
And this may or may not be appropriate, but I want to ask the moderator a question.
Oh, God.
Where did you get that incredible story for your first book?
Ooh, this is always a tough question. There's no answer to this.
Okay.
From the liminal space between dreams,
First,
is
you
that
have
satisfying?
You have to give us the book pitch first. You made us do the book pitch.
Yes. I write the Laura Chambers mysteries about an investigative journalist who lives in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And the first book is about, at least starts at the Okanichi Speedway, and it's about a girl who went missing and her investigation into it. And it is not, I would not describe it as any kind of genre crossover. Like I said, I find it difficult enough to adhere to the rules of one. But as for where the idea came from, I don't know. I mean, Thomas and I were talking about this last night, about, you start with like an image or a scene or a moment, and you're not always clear if it's the beginning or the end or the middle and what came before and what came after, but at least there's some landmark and you can fill in what came before and what came after, and hope that it works, hope that it's good.
What did you say, the word what?
They're called the Laura Chambers mysteries. Yeah, Laura. Yeah.
Last Girl Gone.
Yeah, the first one's called Last Girl Gone. Thank you for advertising my book for me. Greatly appreciate
I'm going
it.
to throw in, as the bookseller over here, that we do have Grant's second book. I was
That's
not
right.
able to get the first one in. So we do have the second.
Thank you, Pete. Anybody else? We got a few more minutes. We're almost done. We got one in the back right here.
So the topic of red herrings was brought up, and I just thought it'd be interesting to hear from really all three of you about how do you navigate that in a story and use that to make it interesting and keep people guessing.
Yeah, well, for a mystery to work, there's got to be lots of different possibilities that the reader can buy into, right? Otherwise, you said you don't like a mystery where you know who did on the second chapter, then that's no fun. We don't want that. So there got to be a few different viable options, and you want to spend time having your hero go down those streets. And so that's part of the fun of it, is coming up with stuff that's not going to go anywhere. And sometimes I think it works best when, even the red herrings, even when they chase down the thing that goes nowhere, they're still learning something important. Sometimes it's just character development, or sometimes it gives them a sideways insight into who really did it. But partly it's just a way to kind of keep the interest going. If they're only pursuing one avenue, right, and that eventually gets them where they want to go, that's not a very interesting mystery. You want there to be twists and turns and be like, oh, well, I was thinking it was the family over here. It was actually the corporation that bought the land and blah, blah, blah. And you're surprised that way. And sometimes it'll be something that, they bring something up just barely in chapter 3, and then it becomes a big deal in chapter 27. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that. So it's a lot of misdirection. It's a lot like being a magician and smoke and mirrors and sleight of hand. I'm gonna get you looking at this shiny object over here, while meanwhile, this thing that I've actually mentioned 7 times, but you didn't notice it because you were spending all your time looking over here, that was the real thing. So that's kind of the fun of it. And often you don't totally figure that all out as you're going, but then once you figure out what it is, you can put little seeds into the earlier chapters, so that people later will be like, oh, now I know why they said that.
Yeah, my number one trick would be I use the smoke and mirrors on myself, which is to say that I can't fake it, so I write towards the ending the whole time, and then at the end I have to change the ending to something else. And then everything I wrote before that seems like a really concerted attempt to conceal the ending, and then you get to put a twist on that at the end. And so, I mean, I don't recommend it. You have to make it all make sense, and that can be kind of tricky. A new second explanation for everything, but that does work for me, and it's happened a number of times.
I'll also say the editors are great for that. Many times I've had an editor be like, okay, wait, for this to make sense, you need to do more here. You need to change this. And that's super helpful because, it's hard to get all those strings to tie together. And sometimes you need that early reader to be like, okay, I see what you were trying to do and you failed. So do this and this and this. Or, maybe if you do it this way and then, the wheels get turning and like, okay, now I'll get it right. So yeah, editors are super important.
I also want to acknowledge that not every author can do this, and many don't try. So that what you're describing here, maybe this sounds like, oh, this is my process, but a lot of people can never even approach the thought process you just described. And we have these micro-genres in crime as well, right? As long as we're talking about genre, we have mysteries, we have thrillers. I love a puzzle, so thank you for saying that. That is a high art form, constructing a puzzle. A lot of best-selling thrillers are about forward motion and danger and suspense, and they do not have any puzzles. They don't have clues, they don't have red herrings. And that's that page turner, that's a form of entertainment too, but I think puzzle is a high art. And if you've got that ability to do your own smoke and mirrors and fool the reader, that's like, cling to that, fight for it. Spend that extra hour sitting there and trying to puzzle through it. It's worth it.
Yeah, I've always felt like that reviewers and critics overly praise language and not plot. Like there's a lot of critics who I think just take plot for granted or think plot's easy. And
or it's lowbrow, like
or it's lowbrow. Like I take a lot of pride in my writing too, but my favorite sentences, the best lines I've ever come up with, the things I'm probably proudest of, were totally subconscious. They just happened as I was typing. And later, like, oh, that was good. I didn't plan that. I was just lucky, like lightning struck. Whereas the plots take so much work. They're so hard to get right. They caught so much cutting and pasting and changing and it's just welding things together. And so it's always bothers me when critics, like, they'll find a line here and a line there and praise an author, and then they'll like say that, oh, well, plot's just an afterthought. I was like, no, you have it backwards. That's the work. That's the hard part.
Anybody else, or we might be out of time?
I was going to say, that sounds like a great place to stop.
Thank you so much to my wonderful panelists. Thank you to the audience for coming out.
And I would like to say that we do have the books for sale over here. Like I said, we've got Thomas's brand new one that's coming out next month available. We also have Juliet's very first novel available, the 8, 9 light. I can't. It's over here. And also some of the other novels that she mentioned from Soho. So come on over. Take it out. It's our lunch break as well. So we'll see you all back here about 1 o'clock. Sandwiches available in the back. Limited number. Stuff next door. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take my water. Actually, that's a good idea. That was awesome. Thanks, guys.
Oh, well,
I tried to throw you the mic and you'd be like, no.
You guys did great. That was so good. You could talk. There's a book festival in my town. Oh, yeah? And so I've
Every year, I read a lot of mysteries. And they're not always the most, shall I say, popular ones, the ones that the big publishers really super hype and kind of thing like that. I like to find those hidden gems that, might get lost in the river of major print runs and so on and so on. And this year, I just want to say that this year's winner was the very first book I read last year. And it was superb. And Kibi Fitch, the owner of McIntyre's, she also read it. And Kibi's a very discerning reader, and she doesn't read lots of mysteries, and she totally agreed with me. And so this year, I'd like to announce the winner of this year's prize is Better the Blood by Michael Bennett. This is the first in a new series featuring Hannah Westerman. And Hannah it takes place in New Zealand. And Hannah is a woman who is pretty much straddling two cultures and really isn't a part of either one of them. One is that she's a woman in the police department, you know, she's a detective in a very misogynistic, you know, police department, you know, like most police departments are. She is also a member of the indigenous Maori tribe. And because she works with the police, she is considered a traitor to her people because they are considered second-class citizens in New Zealand. And they see her as an enemy in a way. And in this book, there is a series of these very ritual murders occurring around the Capitol, and it is only Hannah who is able to discern what is going on. And as she slowly figures it out and is putting it all together, she slowly learns who the perpetrator is. And from that point on, it becomes a true cat and mouse game. And it is just so well done. Strong characters, you know, great setting, a great plot, and a plot that really makes you think. You know, I love those stories that give you a social and cultural background while also entertaining you. And that is what this did. And for that reason, it is this year's Belty Prize winner. And to accept the award for Mr. Bennett, who is in New Zealand, we have the executive editor of his publisher, Grove Atlantic, George Gibson here. He just flew in from New York today, especially to do this. And so, George, please come up. Hang on, I'm trying to get it down. It fell out of its frame. But this is the prize that I would like to give to you to pass on to Michael.
Well, first of all, I think you all know this, but this is one of the great bookstores in America. I mean, without... And I've been to hundreds of bookstores around the country, and this is a bookstore. Not only is it one of the great bookstores, it's a bookstore I love to come back to because I feel as I wander around it, I want to buy 20. In fact, I just bought 2 books in the 10 minutes I was in the store earlier because I couldn't resist. This man is also one of the great booksellers. And when you go into the crime section in McIntyre's, it is the equal, if not the better, of any mystery bookstore, mystery-only bookstore in this country. It's superior to any crime section in any independent bookstore around the country. It's an extraordinary thing. So, cheers to you. And the reason, and the fact of that is why I wanted to come down here, because this is an award that is really meaningful. It means an enormous amount to Michael, and it means an enormous amount to me that you chose the book. I don't edit a lot of fiction, or I don't edit any literary fiction. I only edit a little bit of crime fiction. I acquire mostly nonfiction. But people who sell rights know that I really like crime novels. And so the rights director of Simon & Schuster in the UK one day, 2 years ago, sent me a manuscript, the manuscript of Better the Blood. And I didn't read it right away. And about a week later, she emailed me to say, "Have you started it yet?" and I had to email back to rather chagrin saying, "Sorry, I haven't, but I will." And that night, I had it on my phone, and I went home that night, got into bed around 10 o'clock. My wife was asleep, and I thought, okay, I can at least read on my phone. I won't wake her up. And I didn't stop reading until 2:30. I finished it in one go. I couldn't stop. And I came in the next day and told Morgan Entrick and the publisher, Grove Atlantic, we have to publish this. It's that good. And what Michael Bennett has done, who I've never met him in person, but I've been on Zooms with him many times. He's a wonderful man, and I hope we can get him here. And as I said to Pete earlier, you'll be the first to know if he gets to this country, he will come here. I've gotten to know him a bit, and one of his primary goals with this book was to bring indigenous Maori culture into the light. And he's done that in the guise of a wonderful crime story. So it's a story that will keep you guessing and keep you on the edge of your chair. But it also will introduce you to Maori culture through language, because there are a lot of Maori words in here, which he defines in every case, so you know what they are. But you get a sense for this rich indigenous culture that has faced so many injustices and yet has so much beauty. And I'm excited to say we've bought his next 3 books, and the second of which, Return to Blood, will come out in May. And there's obviously blood being a major element in here, and the third I think is called Etched in Blood, and that'll be down the road a bit. But thank you, Pete. On Michael's behalf, I told him, totally sworn to secrecy about this, and he reacted as I expected he might, with so much gratitude and so much excitement to know that a bookseller here has read this book and loved it and is honoring him. It means a huge amount to him, and he will really, this will be front and center, I know, in his house. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, George. Great to have you here.
That's terrific, man.
Yeah, thank you. So, for anybody who's interested, we do have copies over at the table. And basically what we're going to do now is I'm going to take a little 5-minute break, and then we will get going with what could be what will be one of the highlights of the whole thing. You know, our guest of honor, Joe Lansdale, in conversation with Katie Munger, one of our local mystery writers who has kind of been out of the public view for a long time, and I'm really happy to help her. I'm really happy to reintroduce her to y'all. I think this is going to be a great talk, and in about 5 minutes, we're going to go ahead and start again. So, thank you. All right, everybody. We're ready for the next panel. And this is one that I'm going to do my introduction a little bit backwards. But, you know, this is Soil of the South. You know, how landscape influences creation in a way. And we just have a great panel here. And I'm going to start with our moderator, Martin Clark, who is a former circuit court judge from Virginia, as well as a novelist of 5, or is it 6 novels? 6. And great law-based mysteries. In fact, he's been considered, you know, a drinking man's John Grisham. And I agree completely and totally. His stuff is fantastic. And we have here today with him David Joy, one of the finest Southern writers we've got. David's up in the mountains. You know, his last book, Those We Thought We Knew, Belty Prize finalist, one of the best books I read last year. I've loved every book he's written. And next, Eli Craner, up and coming, solid first book, you know, wins the Edgar Award for Best First Mystery. And he has a new one coming out called Broiler, which is, oh my God, it's going to be special.
Ozark Dogs. Yeah.
I forgot Ozark Dogs. You know, the second one. But his third one coming out, man, it's going to be special. And then Rebecca Renner, who I'm going to give props to because her book, Gator Country, is what really gave me the idea for this panel. Her book is nonfiction, great narrative nonfiction about gator poaching in Florida. And in her prologue, she has like 2 sentences where she's talking about the landscape and the people who have lived there for generations, for centuries, you know, the indigenous people, you know, and the settlers who have come in. And as I read them, I'm going, oh my God, that would make a great panel. And then I asked David, would he be willing to try this? And he goes, I'm there. Eli, same thing. Martin, I'll do it. And here it is. And it was this panel that actually, too, helped me form the rest of CrimeScene. And I am so happy to have these 4 people here. I mean, every panel is great, you know, but this is the one that's kind of special to me. And I want to say thank you all. It's great to have you here. Martin, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Pete.
Thank you much. Welcome to everyone and good afternoon. And Pete and Kibi, thank you. A deep bow and a big tip of the hat. This is a great event. For selfish reasons, the writers get treated really well, and thanks for having us. We're grateful. I'm going to start with Gator Country and Rebecca as part of this is my first gig as a moderator. And so I did research on everyone, and as I read Rebecca's reviews, they are amazing. From Alpha to Omega, it's a first nonfiction novel. And her reviews are just over the moon. And those are professional published reviews. Those are also reviews from readers. And the trick is, I think, much like my pal Beth Macy, what Rebecca has done is written nonfiction that reads like fiction. And I think the reason that the book has been so important to so many people is because in that story, it has a crime story in it. It has a police officer in it, a Florida Fish and Wildlife officer. But in that story, there is a bigger theme, something of value, a payoff delivered to all of us with kid gloves. We're not beaten over the head with it. There's value in the book about bigger themes. And I think that's why it has been so successful. And that culminated, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was a New York Times editor's pick. Mm-hmm. So congratulations. And there's no doubt that as Pete said, Gator Country is definitely about the place. It's about the Everglades, it's about Florida, and it's about the interconnections that come out of there. And you do fiction as well, so I will talk a little bit more about the book in particular. But let's talk about, if you would, just a little bit the difference in writing background for fiction and nonfiction.
Well, I've actually been talking to several of the other writers who are here this week or these couple of days about these differences. And for me, the most immediate feeling is that when I'm writing fiction, I don't have to go track somebody down. I don't have to keep calling or emailing and nagging somebody who doesn't want to talk to me to convince them that I'm not the boogeyman and I'm not scary and they do want to share their story with me. So that's what happens with nonfiction sometimes, but with fiction, I have to pry those people out of my own skull. And the difficulty there is that you have to create all of these details just from thin air. And one of the things that I've realized is that I think the burden of truthfulness, the burden of verisimilitude is much greater for fiction than it is for nonfiction, because I think that readers automatically assume that this is nonfiction, it's come out from a big publisher, it's going to be accurate, this actually happened, no matter how absurd or impossible it may sound. But then if I tried to write the same things that I see in real life in fiction, I don't know if they'd fly sometimes. So that's very hard for me to figure out what the bar is for how life is supposed to be when it's not actually like that in real life, if you know what I'm saying.
Is it worthwhile, or do you think it's good if you're writing nonfiction to bend a little bit, to cheat a little bit, to move the story along? And I'm saying you did, but do you think that's a good idea?
No, I think that's a terrible idea. Because I've been talking to several other writers about this. Actually, I just made friends with Karen Russell, who wrote Swamplandia, and we both have this weird obsession with grifters. And there was a literary grifter who did her grift in the late 90s, early 2000s. She didn't cheat anybody out of anything. She didn't steal anything. But she did have an actor playing her on red carpets, and she said this person was her, and everybody thought that the novels were based on true events, and they weren't. And there was a huge blowback for this person, even though she hadn't cheated anybody out of their money or stolen anything, people felt really slighted. So I don't think it's worth bending the truth. I think that reality is interesting enough as it is. You just have to figure out the right way to say it.
The way to sell it. Let's talk a little bit specifically about the Operation Alligator. And basically, this is about catching egg launderers, or at least part of the book, and a real legit, and help me with the name again, Jeff Babauta?
Yeah, Jeff Babauta.
And basically, and I don't want to give very much of the plot in the book away, but it is an undercover operation that he runs, and I won't tell you if it's successful or not, but at the end, you've said before, in terms of messaging in your book, in terms of outcome, you have noted that there are no villains in Gator Country. And tell us about that just a little bit, please.
Well, I think one of the other burdens that nonfiction has is that we have this responsibility not only to be accurate, but to realize that the people in it are real and that they have real lives that continue on after the book comes out. So I not only wanted to be truthful, I wanted to give even the people who did things that were wrong the space to have their own redemption stories. And I think that villainizing them it goes against that, and it goes against my ethos as a journalist. But I also think that when we villainize people in stories like that, we're not telling the whole story, because I think that every person, or at least nearly every person, has some redeeming quality in them, and I think that's one of the big concepts in literature for me, is that it goes back to that concept of literature gets us to be empathetic with people. I want to read things that make me see the shining kernel of goodness in someone who I might not otherwise see that in. The people who were doing the poaching in this book, like I think poaching is bad, obviously, but I think that they were flawed people who had good qualities too, and I think that some of them may have thought they were doing something wrong. And the most complicated thing is that Jeff, the guy who's the main character, he got to know the poachers, and he got to understand that they were more like him than he had anticipated. And he really liked them a lot, and he had to figure out a way to do his job and protect nature while also doing what felt right by his fellow human beings. And that can be very difficult, especially when it's something like protecting animals that's so emotionally fraught.
The last thing I want to touch on in your book is you talk about how things are interconnected. And in fact, I know that in some of your presentations, you talk about the link between the Everglades and you trace that to even Yellowstone. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Well, every part of nature is connected, but we are also connected to nature in ways that we wouldn't anticipate. The alligators that were poached in Operation Alligator Thief, eventually their hides went to Italy to become handbags and belts and wallets. So this touches international trade. It touches the fashion industry. When wildlife trafficking is a major crime, but it's not the most lucrative one. It's also often connected with larger, more dangerous crimes, more dangerous to humanity, like drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, human trafficking. So the people who are policing wildlife trafficking are also investigating these other crimes as well, because they're connected. And it's sometimes easier to detect the wildlife crime than it is to detect these other things.
And this is the last thing. I'm going to move on to David in just a moment. But if you brought your phones, and I know everybody says, turn your phone off, please. If you would turn your phones on and go to Rebecca's website, and how do you get there?
It's just Rebecca
This, I promise this is worthwhile.
Renner.
And this is a
I don't
big-
know where he's going with this.
This is.
I'm worried.
Go to her website, and this is a real issue for me recently. I am just frustrated as a writer by what I call me views. They're not reviews, they're people who frequently use review platforms to drop, as an apparatus to sort of drop an unhappy ad hominem screed that has nothing to do with the book, but really is just about their thoughts on the world, as corrupt and stupid as they may be. So this is the best antidote. And I have just, I wanted to be Harry Truman and send the letter to the critic. But this is the absolute best antidote to that. So if you're at her website, go to her website, and then go to, it's facts, I think. Just click.
Yeah, the frequently asked questions. I know where you're going with this finally.
Yeah, now you
Okay.
know. So just go to her website.
It's just my name.
It's Rebecca Renner.
Renner.com. Or hyphen.
All right.
Whatever.
So go to her site, click About Me, and then go to Facts. Is anybody there yet? Okay, so go down a little bit, and one of the things is, I'm angry about something you wrote. Do you see that? All right, check out this beautiful rebuttal. Just go there, hit that. This is lovely. This is just genius. Do you see it? There we go. Some people out here Oh, there you go. Isn't that sweet?
I don't even remember the whole thing, honestly.
Yeah.
I know what it links to, but I don't remember what I wrote.
Joe had a good answer a little while ago. He said, life's fucking full of disappointments.
Yeah.
Mine actually, it links to a guided meditation website.
Yeah.
When I put that up there, the amount of hate mail plummeted. It's shocking, honestly.
Maybe it worked.
I think it at least made people go, huh, like maybe she doesn't need to hear this. Maybe I don't even need to be thinking about this much. But yeah, sometimes I have made people
I love
mad.
it. Kudos.
Journalism does that.
I want to talk to David next. As I was sort of touring with my last book in starting in the fall, the book everywhere was Those We Thought We Knew. Every independent bookstore, including this one. Pete has never, ever been as enthusiastic with me about a book as he was with this one. And that held true everywhere I went, from Richmond to Oxford, Mississippi, almost without fail. People love this book. And in Americana music, every year there's a breakout star. You get Tyler Childers, there was Casey Musgraves, Charlie Crockett, and this was the David Joy breakout year. And I asked David, I am not a good reader, but we're here to talk about landscape and how it seeds ideas. And rather than try to talk about this, my reading consists of jury instructions in a dull monotone. But I asked him if I could read just a little bit from his book, and this is an abridged version, and this will give you an idea of how it's done. This is, in my estimation, as good as it gets. A mixed brood of laying hens followed Vess Jones through her garden. Hornworms were eating the tomatoes, and squash bugs eating the beans. And the chickens fought and scratched to eat them both as the old woman plucked them from the vines and tossed them in the dirt at her feet. Her hearing had been going for some time, and as much traffic as there was anymore, she often left her aids in the soap dish by the bathroom sink to keep from having to listen to all the road noise. She was barefooted and wore the same flowered house dress she wore most days, a garment she called a duster. A wrap was knotted tight around her hair to keep the curls from falling flat. her trying to squeeze out one more Sunday from her last trip to the salon. That, folks, is how it's done. And so what I wanted to talk to you about a little bit is that for me, reading this and knowing what it is, everything is precise and spot on and perfect. And it captures this sort of, it brings you into this place with absolute skill, and it's so assured. How is it that you conjure that up?
Oh, I mean, the simplest answer is that I just don't know anything else. You know, I write very specifically about the place that I live, you know, in Jackson County, North Carolina. And I think, you know, when you come to know a landscape intimately and you come to know a place where landscape and people are an inseparable thing, they all carry their own language. You know, I was thinking about when Joe was talking earlier and he was talking about the Sabine River. Like, the only thing I know about the Sabine and the Trinity in East Texas is there's big ass gar there. And I went there and fished for them. But other than that, that landscape makes no sense to me. I was at like a post oak savanna. I can remember the guy explaining, like, I was like, what is that? He's like, we call that a post oak savanna. Doesn't happen where I am. And so, like, if you were to say, David, what's the very first thing that's going to come up this spring? I'd say trout lilies. You know, and my brain just works like that. And because it works like that, you know, when a character claws themselves out of that ground, they sound a certain way. They phrase things a certain way. I was having a conversation this morning with my sister's boyfriend, and I was talking about people in the mountains. I said, you know, a lot of times they won't even speak to you, but they won't even acknowledge your presence if they don't know you. So you could be talking to them and they'd just be looking off. And I think in the past, you know, a lot of times people would think that's where it come from. Oh, they're dumb. Well, no, they're not dumb. They just don't want nothing to do with you. You know, they don't know you. And you know, you get all of these things. Like at the south end of the county, they would say, they, and that would be an exclamation of disbelief. It would be like Eli called me and he said, man, my wife just left me. And I say, they. And I think it's a shortening of they, Lord, have mercy. They, Lord, they. But what I'm getting at is that a place carries a sound. You know, a place not only carries, you know, the plants and the animals and everything else there, but when you've got a group of people who have been rooted to that place for a very long time, those things are inseparable, and it has a sound, and landscape carries story, you know, and so for me, I've just always been very rooted to that one place. I know it very well, but I don't know anything about Chatham County other than that Chatham County historically was the best rabbit hunting county in the state of North Carolina. That's all I know about it, you know.
So riffs in this book, not riffs necessarily, but themes in this book or parts of the story are not necessarily historically accurate, but sort of based on true things. I think, and again, I don't want to give a whole lot of the book away, but there's a book of names or a list of names, and there's a Confederate statue that early on becomes important and sort of an impetus for action in the book. And as I understand it, you had planned this book and been working on it, and you had a lot of this in the bank. You had written it. And then, as you began to sort of put the book together organically, some of these things began to happen in real life.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was a bit of a problem to integrate what you had written as fiction when it then suddenly became real.
Yeah. I think it became, you know, it wasn't surprising that it happened. I mean, you know, one of my earliest memories of media as a child was people picketing in Columbia, South Carolina, trying to get them to take the flag down, in front of the, in front of the Capitol. And so these things happen over and over and over again in the American South. I'm a 12th generation North Carolinian. I ain't ever been nowhere else. If you grew up in the South, you grew up under the shadow of that, and so I think I'd always wanted to write a novel where that was a central conflict. But I started writing this novel, and I was writing, again, everything set very specifically in the county where I live, and so I was writing about the statue that's in downtown Silva. And I had written, I worked on this novel for about 10 years in fits and starts. But I had so much of it written, and then 2020 happened. And we had Ahmaud Arbery chased through the streets and gunned down like a dog. We jumped forward a month, and the police busted in the door and shot Breonna Taylor in her bed in Kentucky. We jumped forward a couple more months, and the whole world watched while Derek Chauvin knelt on the throat of George Floyd for close to 9 minutes until he died before our eyes. And all of a sudden, this country was reduced to a fracture point. And all of the things that I had been writing in the fiction started playing out in the streets outside. And all of the protests that I had written were suddenly happening at the statue in downtown Silva. And it became very difficult to navigate that space between fiction and reality. And that's all I can really say, is that it became difficult for me to maneuver through that. But, looking back, it was also beneficial in the sense that you got to witness some of the things that they did. So, for instance, one of the very first things the county did was they put up a chain link fence around this statue. So they fenced it up like a dog, and you got to witness this. But yeah, it's not surprising to me that that happened. It will happen again. It will happen until those monuments are torn down and melted into fucking pennies, as it should. So that's not surprising to me. The difficult thing as a writer and as an artist was trying to maneuver that piece of ground between fiction and reality.
In, I think, 2016, as part of my day job, I live in a town called Stewart, Virginia, named after the Confederate general. I live in a town named Stewart, Virginia, named after the Confederate general, and I took his picture out of the courthouse. And the hostility and blowback was immediate and persists to this day. And you live in a community that's similar to mine in terms of a lot of the perspectives. Did you get any blowback or unhappiness from your book?
I'm sure there was. It wasn't. It wasn't addressed to me directly, but I'm sure there was. But one of the things I remember so much, I think that as a Southerner, you're born in the shadow of really two things. Flannery O'Connor, when she was asked to, about religion in the South, she said, "I don't know that the South is Christ-centered, but it is most certainly Christ-haunted." And I loved that word "haunted" because it's ghosts, and the two ghosts that we live with are the ghosts of religion and the ghosts of chattel slavery and the American Civil War. And I can remember, this is one of my favorite bookstores, but one of my other favorite bookstores is right up the road from here, the Country Bookshop, and the way that you get there is on the Jefferson Davis Highway. And I can remember riding that road and just how ironic it was to me to be traveling down that road to have the conversation that I wanted to have. You know, and if actually when I'm looking back, there was somebody in that audience that damn sure didn't want to hear what I had to say. What I had to say. So yeah, there are a lot of people who don't want to hear what I had to say, and that's okay. Like Joe said, life's full of fucking disappointments.
Eli's book is Ozark Dogs, and you and I were talking earlier today, and I mentioned to you, and we didn't get to. It was sort of elliptical, our conversation. And my favorite writer is Larry Brown, the late Larry Brown, and word on the street has it that you, and I've seen this in print, that you are the new Larry Brown, and for me that is something phenomenal. In fact, before coming here, I was talking to my agent, Ann Lee Spitzer, and honestly, before I got the info from Pete, I didn't know you or your writing, and so I mentioned your name to Ann Lee's, and she said, try to stand close to him. Maybe some of his talent will rub off on you. So Ozark Dogs, is it Taggart? Am I saying that correctly? It's in Arkansas and in the Ozarks. And for me, because I've lived David's book, and I know, what it is, and when he writes something, I can check it off and it resonates with me, and everything is spot on and I understand it. But what you write about is not familiar to me at all. I don't know anything about junkyards. I don't know anything about the Ozarks. I don't know anything about your part of the world. I don't know a whole lot about guns, family feuds, that sort of thing. But yet, the writing that you have, it is remarkable how it takes me and transports me there and makes me a part of it. That's a gift, and how do you make that work?
Well, I don't know a lot about guns either, and even though there are a lot of guns in Ozark Dogs, I was at the Virginia Military Institute last spring, and Ozark Dogs had just come out, and they had read it. Polly Stewart, who's sitting right there, had invited me to come speak to the cadets, and let me just say that if you don't know a lot about guns and then you go to the Virginia Military Institute and they've just read your book, then they are going to let you know everything that you don't know about guns. So I do know that from now on, if I put a lot of guns, I know where to send the manuscript, beforehand. I'll send it there. So your question was that transporting, and I don't know, man. I mean, the truth of the matter is, for me, I was born in the Delta region of Arkansas, so just west of Memphis, which is a completely different. That's where all my family's from. I would live there just till I was 4. But we went back every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every year. Where we moved was to a town called Russellville, which is actually in the River Valley region of Arkansas, and right on the border of the River Valley and the Ozarks. Like where my parents live is a little town called Dover, and the sign outside says Gateway to the Ozarks. So what I know is that was a gift for me as a kid who was reading and looking and playing around with stories even at a younger age, because what it did for me was jumping between all of those different places, those different regions. It was like a magnifying glass. The cultural differences, even in the Delta, compared to the River Valley, or the Ozarks, were so huge. It was like completely different states. So it was really a good way for me to see those differences and really get a good idea of the place.
Larry Brown once said, when asked by Stephen Usry on his radio show about writing, he said, I try to create really interesting characters and then load them up with problems and see what happens sort of organically. And that's an interesting take on writing. In terms of backdrop, which is our topic here, did you ever, what came first for you, the setting and the backdrop, or the characters?
Yeah, good question. And also, are y'all familiar with Larry Brown? Is anybody out there? So it's so, I'm really, yeah. Well,
it also dates me.
Well, no, it's amazing that you said that. Larry was really, I have a strange, I played football all the way through like college and on. And when I was in college, I was the university's quarterback, but I was also an English literature major, which was a strange combination. And I was writing a lot then, and I got on to Larry Brown. And Larry Brown was the one, I found the documentary, The Rough South of Larry Brown.
Yes.
And I couldn't, this was back before everything was online, and so I couldn't find it. I had a buddy who went to Ole Miss, and he burned a copy, burned a copy out of the library and mailed it to me. And it was watching that video, for those who don't know, Larry Brown was a fireman. Not college educated, just decided one day, he's like, I just want to make something better and I want to see if I can write books. And just took a real workman-like approach to it. And for me, that really resonated with my sports background. And so to hear you say that, that's a big compliment. But for me, I think it comes more, the landscape isn't what comes first. I mean, that's there. My books are set in Arkansas. My first book, Don't Know Tough, is set around a high school football program, which I ended up coaching high school football for 5 years. And then the second one is loosely based on a crime that happened in my hometown, a double homicide. So.
That it's interesting to hear you. That explains the quarterback and the homecoming and the whole 9 yards in Ozark Dogs. So you were actually a quarterback in college?
Yeah, I played.
I didn't mean for my voice to have to raise at the end with the question mark on it.
No, Rebecca and I went to school at Florida Atlantic down in Boca, and I told her my best Key West story ever, which I'll save, and if any of y'all want to hear it, I'll tell you afterwards. But then I also finished up at Ouachita Baptist and then played 1 season in Sweden for an European Football League, and then coached high school football for 5 years. So, yeah.
Who influenced your writing?
Oh, I mean, Larry Brown's a great person, in terms of authors. Harry Crews, Flannery O'Connor, as I go in, Jesmyn Ward, huge when it comes to voice. Yeah, Harry Crews for sure. Feast of Snakes is a football book that's. But there was a teacher named Johnny Wink. And Johnny Wink was so Johnny right now is 80 years old, just turned 80, and he was a professor, and he wore these Coke bottle glasses, and he'd wear these like homemade screen printed shirts that would have like couplets from Shakespearean sonnets on them, like in winged speed, and it would be on the front and on the back, like no motion shall I know. And he was the one that was teaching this intro to creative writing class when I found that documentary, that Larry Brown documentary. And he actually came over to my dorm room and watched it with me. And so this would have been like my junior season. And I was taking this class, and it was in the fall, so I was playing football games on Saturday, but I was writing about a short story a week, and then I would slide them under his desk, or under his door on Friday, and then I'd go play my games, and then when I come home, back from the games, we'd go play wherever, he'd have them all marked up. And I was talking to Joe, there's a guy named Jack Butler, who's, after Joe's talk, it's the perfect book, it's called Jiu-Jitsu for Christ. So it mixes martial arts and all the Bible stuff, And Jack Butler was a guy too that was helping a ton. He was cutting my stories up and marking them up. And so I had really good coaches, really good mentors at that young stage.
Let me ask Rebecca and David the same question, and we'll see if there are any questions from the audience. Who are your influences? Who do you like? Rebecca?
Well, I would name essentially all of the ones that you named, except Larry Brown's, who I'm now going to have to read because
read Big Bad Love. That's where you start.
Yeah. It's really funny because my college fiction writing professor knows this guy, and so I have similar sort of background to probably what you're going to say, and I really resonate with your writing too. And then I also, obviously this book is nonfiction, so I have all of these nonfiction influences. John Krakauer.
Oh wow!
I really love John Krakauer. Gator Country is part adventure writing, adventure journalism. So that's where that came from. One of the other ones who I recently got to know is Gilbert King, who wrote Devil in the Grove, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2016, 2017. He's the nicest guy, honestly. And I got to tell him earlier, or last month, that his book was probably the book that made me go, oh, journalism, like, I think I might want to do that. Journalism can change the world. It can change people's minds. It can do so many things. And that's only a little bit of an embarrassing thing to say to someone to their face. But he definitely had a twinkle in his eye when I said it, so I was glad I got the chance to. But who else? Gosh, it's a long list, a very long list.
Last question for you, fiction or nonfiction next, you think? Next book or project for you, fiction or nonfiction?
I'm working on both.
Good.
And how about you, David? And then we'll see if anybody has any questions.
I'm working on both.
How about you?
But yeah, I mean, it's the standard list. You know, it's Larry Brown, obviously. It's Harry Crews, obviously. It's Ron Rash.
Oh, yeah.
But the biggie for me was William Gay, which I think William Gay was kind of Appalachia's Larry Brown in the sense that he hung drywall for a living. You know, in the very first.
So you met William Gay?
No, I never met William Gay. He died before I was anybody.
Okay.
But I had a lot of friends that were really close to him. But the first thing he ever published, you know, they said, "You got any more stories?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I got a whole trunk full." You know, and he'd just been writing stories, hanging drywall for a living. You know, and those are kind of the standards as far as you know, so much of what people like me or Eli or Scott, you know, Blackburn are doing. You know, and then there was all Tim McLaurin. You know, is somebody that doesn't get mentioned enough, you know, but I think about what he was doing in the middle of this state. You know, he was writing about this area of North Carolina in that same way. You know, I think about the first line of the Acorn Plan, and it was something along the lines of Bubble Riley vowed to drink all of the wine in the world the night that Billy cut the soldier's lung in half. If that's not a fucking first sentence, I don't know what is, right? Like the only other person I know who can write a first sentence like that is Donald Ray Pollock. You know, but piles of influences. But when I think about like that book, you know, my big influences and who I kept studying over and over, I think Randall Keenan is the king of North Carolina. I don't think that this state has ever produced a better writer than Randall Keenan. Randall Keenan, Ernest Gaines, Crystal Wilkinson. You know, Crystal Wilkinson just had a book of nonfiction and kind of a half cookbook, half memoir come out called Praise Song for the Kitchen Ghosts. And if you only got money to buy one book today, go buy that one. And then track down her fiction because she is something. But yeah, you know, I try to read all over the place. You know, the weird ones for me are things like Jeanette Winterson. You know, doesn't fit. Jose Saramago doesn't fit. You know, when you look at me or you know my writing, that doesn't necessarily fit. But those are people whose work I loved. Isabel Allende. You know, Chigozie Obioma. You know, like Chigozie Obioma's his debut novel. He's a Nigerian writer, but his debut novel was called The Fisherman. And if you read that, it is a Southern novel, and that's what was. I read that book and I was like, man, this should win the Southern Book Prize, and it's set in Nigeria, you know. But yeah, I kind of read broadly, but the books I return to over and over again, it is Larry Brown, it is William Gay. You know, that collection, I hate to see that evening sun go down. That's my book.
Well, thank you. A pleasure to work with you, great writers, and I really enjoyed it. And any questions that folks have?
I got a question, which is why did Eli leave Sweden? Like, Like,
I got an answer, dude. So I got a contract to play in France the next year for a team called the Can Iron Mask in the French Riviera. I was home for 3 months. I had hair down past my shoulders, and I cut the hair off and put a picture on Facebook. And this girl liked the picture. And she and I had gone to high school together. So I was just home. So we went on a date to Ruby Tuesdays. And 3 months later, I had a haircut. I broke contract with the French team. Sure. And she told me to get a real job. And the only real job I could get was coaching high school football. So that's why I never continued playing.
Man, you could be living in Poe. Man.
Here we got a question.
So I don't know that this is a question as much as an observation. So I read one of the big prize winners last year, and then I read the David Joy book. And then I read Eli Craner, thanks to Pete. And there's a difference. You know, this big prize winner was written about the South, but it wasn't a Southern writer. And your books made it very clear that you live and come from the South, and because I'm from the Ozarks, I believe that the Ozarks are pretty Southern, not very different than here. So I don't know what it is about you as writers that present that Southern feeling. Is it the landscape? Is it your view of people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think there are very few writers who are capable of writing outside of the place that they know. Like one who immediately comes to mind is Ace Atkins. Yeah. You know, and so for instance, the Quinn Colson series is set in Mississippi, great Southern books. That's where Ace lives. He was also continuing the Spencer series for the Robert Parker estate, set in Boston. You know, and everybody who loves Spencer and people who were in Boston. I can remember being in Boston with Ace, and they were like, "You get it," you know. And these are people in Boston. He's never lived there, but that is a very rare breed of writer. Like typically, I think that's a hard gap to cross. I think you're always crossing some sort of gap, whether that be class, whether that be gender, whether that be you know, race, whether that be place. There are all these gaps that we cross. Places is equally hard to cross, and that's one that people don't necessarily consider a gap. There's a writer I love, a British writer named Roger Ellery, R.J. Ellery, and he just set a book in Appalachia. He knows dick about Appalachia, right? And I'd tell him that. He thought it'd be fun to set it there. And all these, he's big in France, and all the people in France kept asking me. They were like, "Did he come stay with you?" And I was like, "I wished he had," you know, because he just doesn't. He can't know it in the same way that I can't know the Ozarks. But when I read Daniel Woodrell, I think he knows the Ozarks, you know. Or when I read, who wrote Cockroaches of Staymore?
Donald Harrington.
Yeah. When
Donald
I read,
Harrington.
When I read Donald Harrington, it's like he knows the Ozarks, you know. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you can feel it when somebody knows it.
Yeah. For me, I think it was getting out a little bit. It helped living in South Florida for that time, living in Sweden for that time. It helped me, just like being from different regions. A little distance always helped. And then being a coach, and I was a coach really young. I became a head football coach at age 26, which is like being the mayor, a youth pastor, and you know, all these different, like a policeman, like all wrapped into one job. It was an education, those 5 years in small town politics and adulthood and all of these other things, which, speaking of Ace is a guy, if y'all haven't read him, he's great too, but he's one of the few other football guys.
I was getting ready to say,
yeah,
tight end.
Ace was, he's a defensive end. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. His dad coached for like the 40.
Was he defensive end? I thought he was
defensive
tight end.
end, yeah, for Auburn.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to, even though that question wasn't directed at me, I'm going to take a stab at it too. sort of going back to what you said, that like every place has its, I don't even know what you said, but
Sound?
It's sound. I feel like words have a certain texture, and the way we tell stories have a certain pattern, especially in the South where there's this oral storytelling tradition. And I feel like the sound of that is different in different places. Even, so I'm from Central Florida, and my book, a lot of it is set in the Everglades, and I had to really tune my ear to that pattern because it's not necessarily the same. So I could like compare and contrast and find things that were the same and find things that were different. And I'm very happy to say that the people of the Everglades are obsessed with my book. So I think I did I mean, according to them, I did a good job and I captured them. Not like the alligators
Pretty
were
much
captured.
according to everyone else too.
So, another one of the threads in my book is about like that process and learning how to listen and go into a place with empathy and understanding and putting aside what you think you know about a place. And I did cultivate that through reading fiction and talking to people and listening to people. And that was sort of a whole education for me before I got to this point. But also it goes back to the different burdens of truth for fiction and nonfiction. For fiction, those people can't come and yell at you if you get it wrong, but mine can, and mine are all very good hunters. So I really wanted to do right by them.
How about one more question?
I think I have something in common with all three of you. I played high school football. I'm from Orlando, Florida. I met Gilbert King. You're going to be reviewing the book in a couple of weeks here, The Devil in the Grove. And I was born in Asheville, as I told you in the restroom. And I've read a book called Robert E. Lee and Me. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. But I was going to ask the question, you are seemingly pretty young folks. Do you think the next generation of the South can shed some of the guilt that you're expressing?
Well, for me, it's not guilt.
I was getting ready to say, they don't shed the guilt.
I don't feel guilty. I think that's one of the things that happens so long. I don't feel guilty. I don't even feel shameful. Because those are not my actions. What I would feel guilty about and what I would feel shameful about is to sit here and tell you that I'm a 12th generation North Carolinian and not acknowledge that means that my descendants were enslavers. I would feel guilty if I did not say that. And I would feel ashamed if I did not say that. And I would feel guilty and ashamed if I did not recognize that those very things continue to set me in a very privileged place. And I think if we can get to a place where we pull all of that ugly bullshit out of our pockets and sit it on the table, we can start to sort through it. And I think that there are lots of times where I feel hopeful that those things are happening, and then there's lots of times that I don't, because I think that white America's got a really bad problem of trying to usher the monster back into the closet so that they can say, "Ooh, thank God we ain't got to talk about that for any longer." And I just want to kick the door off the closet.
Well, I think that one of the threads in my own work is that how much history affects the present and informs our behavior and informs how we tell stories. And I think that one of the things that we are all doing is that we are being conscious of how we tell stories and how we speak about people, our present, and the past. And I think that, I lost my train of thought a little there. That is at least what young writers are doing in the South, that we are not just not letting the monster hide in the closet, but we're changing the way we behave as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's who said this, David? You might know, Rebecca. It's the I don't know what I've thought until I've written about it. Is that a quote? Yeah, it might be. I don't remember who said that. I don't know what I've thought until I've written.
I'd claim it if we don't.
Yeah, okay.
I say it a lot.
So I guess my point is that I think it's really important that like Joe Happen Leonard, like David's book, that we are writing about it and that we're talking about it and we're taking just like that, like out of the closet, examining it and looking at it and having the ability to do that and to just do it like what we're doing here is really important.
Yeah, not shying away from, Joe earlier said he didn't realize that character was gay until he was in the character. And I can guarantee you that, knowing his work, it was not a moment that he shied away from it, that it was a moment that he embraced that fully, but that he embraced it knowing that a mistake would not be inconsequential. And that's a very important thing, and I think that's what Rebecca was saying, is that a lot of writers, and it's because you can no longer, it can't be inconsequential. For a long time, it didn't matter. If you were a white man and you wrote a book, it could be, completely wrong and there was no consequence. And that's not the environment that we live and work in anymore. And so I think there is a recognition that when you're going to cross these gaps, that you recognize that you have an obligation to try to do that to the best of your ability. You don't shy away from it, but you have to recognize that those mistakes are not inconsequential.
I have to say, that is a great way to end this panel. Thank you all. Man, it was everything I was hoping for, So thank you all. That was wonderful. We will be having books signed back in the bookstore. We have one more panel to go, and that's on origin stories, another one that I've been really looking forward to. So come on back. We'll be starting in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, no. He's just doing it.
Yeah. You've met writers.
Thanks, man.
All right, everybody. What a great day. And what a great way to end the day. With one last panel, another just extremely interesting panel, one that I've been looking forward to for a long time. So just to quickly introduce everybody, this one is going to be called On Origins, how both writers and stories are made. And I think this is going to be a fascinating talk. This is, I had the idea, and then Jamie jumped on board and ran with it. So this is going to be great. And our panelists are Thomas Mullen once again. Again, I want to mention that we do have his brand new one coming out in a month for sale. But we have his others. All of you should try him. He's excellent. Kevin Powers. Lord Almighty, can't say enough good things about Kevin Powers. National Book Award finalist for his first book with Yellow Birds. Second book, great novel. Third book, A Line in the Sand, a Belty Award finalist, and a great mystery. And then Tim Mulaney on the end, working with his history, or his novels, or his series set in DC. I'm tired. Excuse me, folks. But in, San Francisco. And Jamie, our moderator, who's written 3 novels, and the one I'm going to highlight is 3 Graves Full, which is my favorite, and which I recommend to all new homeowners with the warning that you never know was buried in your backyard. So, folks, thank you. It's all yours, Jamie.
Thanks so much for being here this afternoon. This has been wonderful. Great weekend. One of the funny things when you're a writer is that normal people very often will ask you, where do you get your ideas? And I've been doing this professionally for a little over 10 years, and at one point I was even running a publishing news website, and I've talked to hundreds of writers, and you get really funny reactions about where do you get your ideas. Some writers, honest to goodness, kind of get offended by the question. And I have the secret to this is because if you really answer it properly, you're going to probably sound like a crazy person. So I'm going to put these guys on the hot seat. We're going to talk about inception, both for becoming a writer and for actually how the stories get done. And it was really great to get reacquainted with their work. So we're going to do, sometimes it's not great to ask everybody the same question, but their answers are going to be different. So some of these are going to be the same. So I'm going to start right here on my left, Tim. But I am going to talk to you all about cast your mind back, however old you were. What Joe was writing, he was writing stuff when he was 4. But what gave you the idea that you were even allowed to do this? What was the inception of, I might be the person who gets to write the books?
I'm not sure I still have permission to do it. I just do it. I agree with Joe's thing. I think it's in you. I distinctly remember drawing and writing comics, as he mentioned, when I was a kid, because I was also kind of a comic kid. I read the pulp adventures. My parents had all the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels and everything else. So that I just want to get lost in those worlds. And I would occasionally write things, but I didn't. Both my parents, who were amazing, because I grew up surrounded by books, but they had science backgrounds. They were in medicine and chemistry. So the notion that you could be a writer or you could work in comic books, it was more when I was thinking about school, it was what kind of science are you going to study, what kind of science are you going to be. And then after I started working, I found myself going back and forth on airplanes, and I just started writing short stories. And I just started setting them in, and I decided this was something I wanted to do. And then when the short stories got picked up, that gave me the confidence of, okay, maybe I can do this. And then it was literally teaching yourself to write till I started to meet other writers and realized, wow, people actually do this. And all the books I've been devouring actually came from a place of people who are taking this seriously. So I think you give yourself permission just by doing it and then stumbling along the way and finding that you have more stories to tell, really.
Kevin, did you always think you would be a writer, or do you remember when the idea crawled into your brain?
Well, I loved reading. I mean, books were my favorite objects in the world. I remember going to the book exchange in Midlothian, Virginia with my mom. We had a little thing where I was allowed to pick out one book, and they had a poetry section that was like that wide. And for some reason I was drawn to the cover of these collected poems of Dylan Thomas. Oh, well, this guy looks kind of interesting. I was probably 12 or something, I can't remember. And I remember opening it and just at random reading "The force that through the green fuse drives the flower." And I was like, just completely blown away. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know words could have those relationships to each other. And I just thought, I don't know what is going on here, but like, I want to spend the rest of my life feeling like this. And I'm sure I tried to write a poem that day. And then, yeah, it was just sort of like trying everything I could to sort of recreate that feeling of excitement I got when I had that encounter. And I've had similar feelings with fiction, and that's why I tried to write stories. And yeah, it's been a kind of journey ever since to see if I can keep getting away with it, as somebody said earlier, Yeah.
So I'm going to try hard not to talk super fast because I had an espresso next door, and they pour really big espressos. It was like the biggest espresso I've ever been served in my life. So I'm going to try to go slow. I've been told I talk fast under normal circumstances, so anyway. But I have always wanted to be a writer. I have always loved to do this. I can remember back when I was a little kid, there's this book series, it's still in print, the Mr. and the Little Miss books, like Mr. Happy, Mr. Nosy, Mr. Messy. The first one I remember my parents getting me was Mr. Worry, which I think was due to the fact that I am a bit of a worrier. And I loved those books. And it's funny, when I became a parent 17 years ago, I bought a couple of them for my kids, and actually they're terrible. They're really not good. But the I don't know, 5-year-old version of me loved them, thought they were awesome. So I would write my own. Like I would get, standard 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, fold them in half because the books were pretty small, and I'd staple the pages, and I would draw the cover. My first one was Mr. Invisible. I did like dotted lines to connote invisibility, which I'm sure I copied from the Fantastic Four. And I just wrote my books. I loved doing that. And so then, fast forward a couple of years, and I read the Hardy Boys mysteries and the Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators. And I would write my own mysteries about, young boys solving crime. And then a few years later, I'm reading the Spencer novels, and I wrote a book, it was probably like in high school, about a former Red Sox pitcher who solves crimes in Boston. So it was a lot of copying, but for as long as I can remember, I've always enjoyed doing it and just wanted to find a way to keep doing it as a grown-up.
So, and you guys can jump in however you like on this one. So the first novel that was published, your debut novel, tell us what you will about the inception for the idea. How did that story, how did it germinate? How did it bloom? Me in particular? Whoever wants to jump in, because I want to hear all these stories.
You had the espresso.
All right, I had the espresso. I'll go first.
You're on a roll, Tom.
So my story's a little convoluted, but I'll try to keep it simple. I wrote a manuscript about a rock band. Can't remember where the idea first came from, but it was at the time, it was in my 20s, I was really enamored of people like David Foster Wallace and Dave Eggers, people that wrote like very energetic, caffeinated, long sentences, lots of slang, lots of swears. David Foster Wallace had footnotes. Anyway, it was a very contemporary feeling novel. It was good enough to get me an agent. Alas, we were not able to sell it. So it was really a heartbreaking experience. There was a summer where she was pitching, and I kept waiting for that good phone call, and it never came. So that was pretty crushing. And she calls me and says, every last publisher has said, no, I'm sorry, we struck out. But I still want to work with you, but you need another book. And I didn't have another book in my back pocket. I'd spent years working on that book. And she said, so, take a minute and, lick your wounds and heal from this devastating loss, but send me some other ideas. And I had a bunch of ideas, and most of them were similar to this contemporary rock book, but one of them was a historical idea, and I'd gotten because I had read a magazine article one day at the YMCA when I'd forgotten to bring my music, and I just found myself flipping through an issue of Time magazine about somebody who studied viruses, and it talked about the 1918 flu and how there were some towns that in the Pacific Northwest or the Rocky Mountains that hadn't been infected yet, but they decided the only way they could protect themselves from this devastating illness was if they closed all the roads leading into town and posted armed guards to prevent anyone from coming in. And when I read that, I know it sounds weird post-COVID because we've all lived through something kind of similar, but in the late 90s, I was like, wow, that sounds wild. I'd never heard of anything like that. And I'd had that idea for years, but I didn't think I could write it yet. I thought it would be like my mature third novel. Because a lot of writers like Barbara Kingsolver or Michael Chabon, they would write a couple contemporary novels, and then they would wow the critics with their third historical novel, like The Poisonwood Bible or Cavalier and Clay. So I'd had that idea, but never acted on it. And so after being rejected with the other book, I sent my agent a list of ideas, and that was in there. And she said, you should write that one. And I said, well, can I? It's my first novel. Am I allowed to write a historical novel? It's my first novel. And she was just like, yeah, just do it. And so I think I channeled my depression into being rejected and was just so encouraged by her confidence that I just sat down and just did it. Not that it was easy, but that was the kick I needed to start it.
Yeah, I had written a poem. So I'm a veteran of Iraq, and I'd come home and I was writing stories and writing poetry, sort of trying to sort through my experience and the collective experience of being involved in that war. And I'd written a poem that had a kind of reference to the speaker of the poem references something that another soldier says. And the soldier's name is Private Bartle. in the poem, and I thought, well, I wonder what that guy's deal is. Why did he say that? I mean, I wrote the poem, so you'd think I would know. And I just thought, well, I want to find out more about this person. And it turned out there were the similarities between his experience and mine, so that was sort of useful. And so I ended up turning it into my first novel. I mean, kind of the inciting image, not necessarily an event, came very soon after I started thinking about this guy's story. It was about a friendship, a relationship, the feeling of grief and guilt and disappointment and sorrow and all that stuff. So if you're looking to be cheered up, it's on the table over there. Yeah.
I was writing short stories, and I was living in San Francisco, right in the Chinatown area, and I wanted to write stories in Chinatown. I started spending a lot of time doing research, walking around, and talking to people, and all that. And I had this idea for this novel, and I didn't know if I could write a novel. I didn't know if I was going to write another novel. So I kind of poured everything I loved about reading and mysteries into that novel. So everything from if you think about San Francisco as a place where so much great crime fiction has come from, and that noir tradition of the city. So it was kind of a love letter to every, Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and Sax Rohmer and all those things in a contemporary way. How would you write a story like that through a very, very contemporary lens? And I wasn't sure if anybody would pick it up or publish it, but my agent called me and said, yeah, they love the book, and they want to know about the next one. I'm like, what do you mean about the next one? They're like, oh, it's a series. I'm like, it is? So for me, I like most things in life, I just backed into it because of my love for reading and then writing, of just like you're telling stories to yourself, and if other people want to read it, then that's then that's a home run. So yeah, for me, a lot of it was being in that place and kind of asking myself questions, looking around, like, what could happen here, and what all the what ifs, when you really try to get a sense of place and you just open yourself up.
Well, I'm going to stay with you for a second, because that was something I wanted to ask you in particular. We talk about Inception and where we get ideas, but you're 5 books in. Hanging the Devil is the 5th or 6th? Kate?
5th in that series, but 6 books in. Yeah.
Okay, but fifth in the Cape Weathers series. So, for you with Inception and coming up for another thing for Cape and his merry band to do, you have to honor what they've already done. Would you find it more freeing? What are the freedoms and constraints of coming up with new things for these characters to do?
The best advice I got after that book came out, I discovered other writers and conferences like this, and I started talking to other writers, and the first bit of advice I got from writers who were super established and were like 10, 12 books in a series was like, you're not writing a series, you're writing a standalone that happens to have some recurring characters. Very different from like epic fantasy. I'm reading a trilogy and it's called Lord of the Rings, and there's this, they all go together, you have to read the first one first. Because on average, I forget the stat, but I think most readers discover a writer like 7, 8 books in, and they don't really get critical mass till like 10 or 12 books in. So, and that certainly has been my experience. I meet people at these conferences, and like, oh my, I love that guy, I'm gonna read his book. And then you realize, oh, that's the 6th book, and you go back and you read the backlist. So I think of them as standalones. I have written a pure standalone called Jump, but there's a definite universe there. But especially in the most recent book, Hanging the Devil, if you had read the other books, there are little breadcrumbs. But I never, to me, it's like watching another James Bond film. The first 20 minutes is not about the backstory on how he became a spy. You're just in it. It just moves. And I think figuring out how to deconstruct the context and the texture of the world in which these characters exist is what makes a book work versus a book that is preamble. I'm not a prologue or a preamble guy at all, and if you haven't read the other books, it should not matter. So that's I think just part of the engineering of it all.
Tom, I had read about I believe it was Darktown, started out an inception, you actually thought it might be a nonfiction book. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the idea behind Darktown, it's a mystery novel. It's a police procedural set in 1948, 3 months after Atlanta hired its first 8 African-American police officers. And at the time, the police department was segregated. So you had your white headquarters, and then the new 8 black cops had to operate out of a makeshift precinct in the basement of the black YMCA. They were not allowed to carry firearms, drive squad cars, patrol white areas, or arrest white people. And so when I read that, I just thought that was fascinating, and I thought, there's a story here. So at that time, I'd written 3 novels, and I wanted to try something different. And I wondered, maybe this is a nonfiction book. So I went to the library and found, old articles from that time period and read through a lot of microfilm, hoping I would find some amazing trial of the century or crime of the century they were involved in, and maybe I could write like The Devil in the White City kind of thing. But I don't know, after a couple of days in the library, I determined, maybe there's a crime of the century in here somewhere, but it might take me months to find it. And I'm not a history professor. I don't have a little army of research assistants I can dispatch to do my research for me. It was just me. And the more I read too, I'm like, I'm a fiction guy. I'm a novelist. I want to write this as a novel. So, I did toy with the idea of doing it as nonfiction. I think there's still a great nonfiction book to be told about that. Maybe not just about Atlanta, but maybe all the southern cities that went through something like that. But ultimately, I love telling stories. I love having the freedom to create my own characters and create my own scenes. So, so much of those books are grounded in research and real stories, real events that I learned about from some of the officers themselves and stories that they told and interviews and such. But, I just love fiction. I think it's just such a powerful art form. And I decided, after flirting with the idea of writing nonfiction, now it's going to be a novel.
And Kevin, your first novel, the spark of that was some of your own experiences, but your subsequent work has come elsewhere, the ideas of these. How was it different, more difficult, easier, special to have an idea grow out of a personal experience versus one that falls on your head like a piano in a cartoon?
I guess because the concerns of each book are similar, and they do grow, the concerns grow out of, the thematic concerns grow out of my personal experience. I'm interested in the impact of violence on people and communities, and I encountered, different stories that just kind of stick with me, or fragments of stories, or just stuff that I can't stop thinking about. And then that will bump up against a different fragment of a story or something that I come across that I can't stop thinking about. And that bumps into another one, and then suddenly there are, 3 different characters who I think, well, what would happen if they sort of encountered each other? Or I think maybe because I have a background in poetry, I'll be struck by a specific image in my head. Sometimes a very specific visual image, and I think, why am I thinking about this image? What is it about this image that has power? What is it about this image that has power that's lasting, more than a day or a minute or whatever? And that is just a process of exploration. It's like, why am I continuously thinking about this? And the hope is that if I'm curious enough about it for a durable period of time, that if I put it down on the page, that I'll find other people who are similarly interested in it. So
we all hope.
Yeah, hope. Yeah.
So I remember when I first started writing a novel, I did it kind of in secret because I didn't know if I was the person who was allowed to do this. And when I told people, then I started saying, yeah, I'm writing a book, and I was sort of braced for the backlash. And I was really fortunate. Everybody was like, yeah, why not? And everybody was great. When you started to do this for real, who did you tell, and what kind of reactions did you get when you were going to jump in?
Like just when I was writing, who did I tell?
When you started, when you started doing this, and you're like, I'm going to be a writer.
I didn't talk about it a lot because honestly, I really wanted it to work. I wanted to be published, and I was worried if I talked about it, I would jinx it, or I would be that person who always talks about, I'm a writer, but never actually does it. So, and like, I had I went to Oberlin College. I loved it. It was a great, great education. But, there were definitely some people who really liked having this like image of themselves as like this deep artist and, being really smart and deep. And it was kind of like an act, and I really, really did not like that. And I was like, I just want to write. I don't want to like be a writer or have this personality around it. Like, I just like telling stories. So I mostly kept it to myself. I didn't like hide it. Like, my close friends knew that was the thing I would do sometimes. I'd be, typing stuff up in my apartment. And there were times where I would like not go out on a Saturday night because I really wanted to write something. And that would be weird, telling people sometimes I would just make up excuses and lie. I wasn't feeling well or I'm sick because I don't want to be like, oh, I've got this really awesome idea for a chapter, so I'm not going to go to the bar. Have fun, guys. But, I did that sometimes. So like my close friends knew I wrote, but like, to this day, it's not something I like bring up in conversation because I don't want to sound like one of those conceited people who's all full of themselves. Like, I love writing and I love reading, but it's not really about me. It's about the books, and that's what I care about, and that's what I want people to read.
I was, I remember I was working at Capital One in the small business loan collections department.
I also have a background in banking, so I feel your pain.
It's just the most utterly soul-destroying work you could possibly do. And anyway, so I'd taken some college courses, and I was talking to a friend, and I was just like, God, this is awful. I just took everything that like Sally's cookie shop owns, and it was just I hated every second of that job. He said, well, what do you want to do? And I was honest. I said, well, I write. I really want to write. I want to try it. He said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, well, I don't know. What if it doesn't work? And he said, well, are you more afraid of failure or regret? And I thought, oh, that's a really good question. And I guess I was more afraid of regret, So I quit that job, and I was fortunate. I still had the GI Bill. I went back to school full time, changed my major to English, took creative writing classes, and I had a lot of material that I'd written. I had tons of stuff, and I started showing it to professors and got encouragement. And I certainly have faced rejection along the way, but I felt this kind of that decision, that conversation was so freeing that I didn't really care about anything else after that. I was just like, well, I can do it. Whatever happens after that doesn't matter.
I was a bit like Tom in that I didn't want to be that guy who was like, I'm a writer, and so what have you written? Well, I'm just talking about being a writer, but I haven't actually written anything. And so I didn't really tell anybody about it, and then I was writing stories. And then my mom, who's since passed, was just this unbelievable reader. She would, read a book in like a day or 2 days, whatever. So I mentioned it to her, and I started sending her the stories. I was writing them, and she was like my first reader, which was an unbelievable gift. And it was different from the genre she was reading. And then after those stories started getting published, if someone knew about it, I would talk about it. I like talking about writing just like I love reading, but I would never be the one to bring it up. And even now, like here, I'll talk about it because we're all here for a reason. But I don't sit next to strangers on the bus and say, hello, I'm a writer, or any of that. I like telling the stories. I like reading, and I think that part of other parts of my life, I'm more extroverted. I think I'm a little more introverted about the writing because it's in your head until it's on the page, kind of a thing. And I think I do have some of that. I don't want to jinx it, kind of a thing. So
it's always weird, like you're in a party or something, and somebody's introducing you. You're like, oh, here's Tom. Tom's a writer. He writes books, and then they just stop, and then you're like, okay, I need to say something deep or witty, I guess. It's a weird thing to just talk about. Like, no, yes, I do write books. I hope you read them.
I always get did you write anything I would have heard of?
Yeah.
I'm like, almost certainly not.
I say, well, that depends. Do you have good taste? Like,
I always get, what's your real job?
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back again to the first big writing project and how that developed. And compare and contrast that a little bit with this latest book. How has the process changed? How does Inception change? What were the two experiences if you tried to book it? Not that you're going to die tomorrow, we're all going to be fine. Kevin, give us the contrast there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had different goals. I mean, for each book. So, I mean, the first book was obviously very personal to me. I mean, it's told in the first person. This most recent book, you know, we were talking just a little bit before. I knew that I wanted there to be, you know, the first book's kind of like atmospheric. I tell people the setting is inside this guy's head, you know. So with this book, I understood that I wanted there to be a strong plot, strong enough to keep the reader engaged. And so, you know, thinking about the mechanics of that was different from a kind of like atmospheric sort of poetic meditation on the effects of war or whatever. But, you know, ultimately, like, the goal is the same. I want people to think about what happens when we like collectively decide to send young people off to kill each other. And so I took a different route to try to achieve that goal. But yeah, it was interesting. And I guess one of the things that I appreciated about it is I'm excited by the challenges when I sit down. I'm excited by the blank page. I'm excited by the uncertainty. I've come to the point where I'm excited by the prospect of failure, of like that excitement of when you know you've gotten it right, which is a rare enough feeling, admittedly. But so yeah, it was a completely different experience. But I mean, at the same time, it just involved me sitting down at my desk and just going like this for enough hours, you know, where it's like, it is work, and as long as I keep that in mind, I don't distract myself from actually accomplishing the task at hand, you know.
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm faster, and I think I've figured a few things out better. You know, I have kids. I have two boys. They're now taller than I am, but so, you know, but for 17 years now, I've had like, you know, serious competition on my time. Like, I can't just be, I'm going to spend 8 hours on Saturday, you know, working on my book. It just doesn't work that way anymore when you're a parent. You might have 2 hours on a Sunday night. So it's like, okay, I've got 2 hours. I'm going to do something. I'm going to get something accomplished. So I just think, you know, the demands of life and family sort of force you to be maybe more efficient. So I think I'm more efficient with my time, and I, you know, kind of sometimes know it can be, people can kind of like mythologize what it's like to be a writer, and like, oh, well, I need to wait for the moment, or I need to get on my magic carpet and be swept away. Like, sometimes you just got to put your ass in the chair and start working on that keyboard and hope something works. And hopefully it'll be a good 2 hours. Maybe it won't. It's not always going to go well. But you kind of just need to do the time, and eventually you'll get somewhere. And I think I'm like a little bit better of a judge of a project. Like, when I first have an idea, like, I think this is a good idea, or I don't know about this. But I will say, still to this day, the hardest part is deciding what to do next. Like, after my first book, it was so hard to come up with a second book idea, and I cycled through a few ideas that didn't really go anywhere. And I have spent long periods of time on things that ended up being mistakes, and that really sucks, to be like, I just wasted 6 months. But at the same time, even the ones that work, there's a period where you're like, I don't know if this is any good, but I'm gonna keep going just in case it is good. But what that inevitably means is that when you're working on a new project and it's like week 4 and you're still not sure if it's any good, it's like, well, is this a sign I should stop, or I'm going to waste 6 months like that other time, or is this just part of the process and I need to just suck it up and keep going? That's still hard to figure out.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you guys both think about this, because we have to hear about your contrast, and I do want you guys to comment on how hard or easy is it to bring up the next project, the new idea. So tell me about the book and books.
I'll combine the two, I guess, because for me, it's like Tom mentioned about his first book. I didn't realize how ambitious my first book was, in that it jumps in time back and forth, and half the book is written from the point of view of the female character. And it was just the story I wanted to tell, and as it was coming together, it seemed to work. I realized that some other series that I liked, where they really got into the backstory, they got into the psychology of the characters, they did that like 4 or 5 books in, probably because they were. So for me, that process was really learning how to aggressively self-edit. I don't outline, so that And so the process for me hasn't changed much. I'm still an organic writer where I'm telling myself a story, but I think I'm a lot more confident as a writer when I'm writing, and a lot more aggressive as a self-editor to figure out, like, it's okay. The great legal thriller writer John Losqua talks about genius mode and idiot mode, and he always says when you're writing, you're a goddamn genius, you're better than Shakespeare, this is the best story that's ever been told, no one will have to ever write a book after me, and you get something on the page, and the next day you look at it and say, what idiot wrote this? And you cut it up. So I think giving yourself permission to, as Kevin was saying, like, it's okay to get it wrong or run into a brick wall, I think is just sort of key. And then I think as far as the next idea, the thing that you realize is really precious is time, but I've tried to come to terms with the fact that you can't control that all the time. Your subconscious is working, and when I get to writing, it seems to come together. But like the book I'm working on right now, I should have started 9 months ago, but it wasn't there. And I was thinking about different trails, and now the pieces are starting to gel, but a lot of that was maybe this, maybe that, going to different places to spark an idea that I could get excited about, like a story that I genuinely wanted to tell that I thought was important and I thought could be a good novel, as opposed to, oh yeah, I could write this. It's got to be I really want to write this story for me.
Yeah, there's an old proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So, you can put it off, but you just need to start.
I didn't know I had to take notes. You guys keep dropping these little gems, man. I'm going to have to watch the recording. Kevin, how is it for getting the next idea for you? And then we're going to go to questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience has been that at some point during the writing process, I have an idea that seems like it will fit into the story that I'm currently working on, and I hit it with a hammer trying to get it to fit into the story that I'm working on. I realize that it doesn't, and then by the time I'm done with copy edits on that book, if it's still there, I think it's probably worth pursuing as something else. And it doesn't always work, I've had false starts and stuff like that, but that's the way it's been for me, is that there's some element of a story, even if it's a very small seed, that I realize isn't part of the story that I'm currently telling, and I stick it in the back of my mind and hope that I don't forget about it by the time it's time to go again. And I guess I don't know if this is wood or not, but
I got you.
I hope that I continue to be lucky enough to have more ideas. It doesn't always feel like you'll have more ideas, at least for me. Sometimes I feel like this is the last idea I'll ever have. But so far, that hasn't been the case. So.
But that whole thing of, like, don't throw anything away.
Well, right. Oh, yeah. I mean, I have, the absurd amount of, like, legal pads and phone notes, and they're just like, why did I think that was going to be useful?
But it might turn into a story.
Or so it's still there. Yeah,
I have to think that one of the absolute best things about being a writer is that no matter what's happening to you, nothing is ever wasted.
Yeah.
It's all.
Or the worst possible experience becomes a funny story after the fact.
I was having a car accident, and after the second hit, and I knew nobody was going to the hospital, I started writing the story of it in my head. Anyway, I told you these guys were going to be great, all with the same questions. I really enjoyed that. Do you guys have any questions for them about process and inception?
All quiet? Are we sure?
They're all questioned out.
We've solved all the knowledge in the world.
We've got one right
Wendell's
here.
got a question.
Now, have you ever started a novel and realized you started it in the wrong place?
You
Do
mean
you know what I mean?
like the wrong point in the
so
story,
the beginning,
or the wrong physical place?
No, the wrong place in the story. So you realize
I
it
thought you
actually
meant like
should
Baltimore.
start on page 100, or do you know what I mean? Does that ever happen?
Yes.
I always start at the end by accident.
Oh, really?
Do you start at the end? Really?
I write so far I always write the ending first, not knowing it's sometimes sort of being somewhat aware that this is it'll be the end of something, whether that's a scene or a chapter or whatever, and then I have to sort of like work my way towards it. realize, like, well, where am I trying to go?
If we could write a book together, it'd be great, because I always start with the beginning, and I never know how it's going to end.
Yeah, so,
yeah.
I never know how it's going to, I never know how it's going to start.
Fantastic. Right, that's a new collaboration.
The next big bestseller is that Kevin Powers, Tim Mullany novel together. That's great.
I do a lot of copying and pasting. I do a lot of moving things around. Like most of my books typically follow like multiple protagonists, so I'm always jumping from A to B to C. And yeah, there's times like, oh, maybe I should move this here, move that there. So I do a ton of that. But for the most part, I've been lucky. I've started them in the right place, I think. The one exception would be, I talked about this a little bit this morning, the bank robber book, where I started with the bank robbery scene. I was like, this feels so cliched. And then I'm like, well, maybe it starts with them waking up on the cooling boards. And then I was off to the races.
Here you go. Hold on, say it again. Sorry.
Like, do you shop out your ideas in the middle? Like, if you're like, oh, I'm going to give up, is this a personal process and you kind of guard, like, your storytelling, or do you let other people come in and say, this isn't really good? Like, how do you sort of make those decisions?
I never show anybody anything until I think that it's finished, and then that person shows me how it's not finished. But I usually go pretty far down the road before I show anything to anybody. So that's my approach.
Same. I feel like it has to be working to an extent for me before I'm like sharing it out. I think the difference between writing and being a successful writer is that, like, can you learn how to torture yourself and look at, you've got the ball of clay, but is it working? And looking at the writing a little more objectively and kind of, is this going to work? What would I do if you were your own editor? What would you do to sort of get it in line and in shape? And if it's not working, it's okay to bang your head against the wall and just like, why isn't that? Because I think telling, if you think about it, it's just, books are really just a series of like, okay, what happens next? What happens next? If this happens, then what happens next? And if you can't answer that question, you kind of have to go back and look at the where you took the first jump and then try to untangle that.
So my wife is my first reader, and not all the time, but I typically end up showing her, like, once I feel like the first 50 or 60 pages are pretty solid, I'll be like, let me know what you think of this. Or I'll find like an endpoint that makes sense and be like, just let me know, is this working? Am I crazy? Because I feel good about it, but what am I getting wrong? And often she has sometimes she's been like, no, this is not working. And I've completely changed it as a result. But usually it's like, she'll give me feedback and tweaks, but she'll be like, yeah, I think you should keep going. Although the one that I'm working on now, I showed her the first chapter, and I don't think I've shown her anything else since, and I'm almost finished. So I'm just waiting to finish the whole thing and be like, boom, tell me what you think.
Conversely, just as a little bit of a contrast, I actually have one or two trusted writer friends who I do a little workshopping with sometimes when I get stuck, and it's for me that's worked great. But I can't do the broad anonymous workshopping or like a story room, like in a writer's room. I don't think that would be good for what I do. But I have learned to workshop ideas with a couple of trusted friends.
First person and third person. When do you know that you should tell the story in first person versus third person? Did you ever change your mind?
I certainly have. I started writing short stories, and a number of those were in first person. But then when I started writing novels, the stories I wanted to tell, I realized I wanted to jump around a little bit, and I wanted to shift perspectives. But I also wanted the feeling of first person when you were, if you think about, where the camera's looking through which character's eyes, right? So I write close in third person. So there's the way the point of view of an individual chapter, even the attitude of the descriptions reflect that character, but it's written in third person. And that's, again, just because, like, my latest novel goes back and forth between Hong Kong and San Francisco and then mainland China. And I knew, and one of the chapters is written from the point of view of a macaque monkey, so I couldn't exactly write in first person and not have the reader get a seizure. So I just had to stay in third person. So to me, that's because of the story I'm telling. But there's something intimate about first person that a lot of the writers I like to read are just masterful at that. So yeah, I think it's a choice based on the story you're telling.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess first person has limitations, but it does have the benefit of providing that level of intimacy. So right now, the project that I'm working on, it's first person from an unnamed narrator, and he's basically talking about other people. And so I've been thinking, like, the last couple of times I've sat down, like, why isn't this in third person? Like, what am I doing? So I don't know yet. So it's something that I'm thinking about. I feel like I'm far enough along that I should have figured it out by now, but I haven't. So I don't know. It's all fixable, you know. But for me, it's more of an instinct thing. It's like who should be telling this story? How big is this story? And the mechanics of it are important too. I mean, do I want this to only be from one perspective? Because that has its own consequences too.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I used to wrestle with that and agonize about it a lot earlier, and I have sort of stopped. I think I decided I just think I'm better at or just more comfortable with third person. I do like what they call a close third person. So, like, you know, if there's a chapter about Kevin and we're following Kevin and I'm not letting the narrator know what's in Thomas's head or what the other person's head, but the reader might know because the previous chapter might have been following Thomas and you got to see what he was thinking. So I like doing it that way again because I like jumping around with characters, and I like, you know, that way the reader gets to know more than each of the character knows themselves, which I think gives you an interesting way to tell stories. So I used to go back and forth earlier, like, should this be first, should this be third? I don't know, but now that I think about it, I haven't really struggled with that the last few books. I've just kind of fallen into this, like, I think I'm good at the third person, I'm gonna stick with that. So maybe one day I'll try something else, but it's working for me, so I'm afraid to mess with it.
And I heard, I don't remember what the context was, but I heard a writer one time talking about why he never writes in first person, because he said, well, who are they talking to?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question.
How about one more question?
I have a question about an historical novel. Okay, so the incident is historical, but what about your characters? Are they fictional?
So for me, I typically I work hard to make sure that the time period, the setting is historically accurate, but I'm writing about fictional characters. So there's different types of historical fiction. There's people who will write like a novel about Abe Lincoln and his wife and how they met, or a novel about John Dillinger or whoever. I do the other kind of historical fiction where like all the characters are completely invented. I make them up. There might be in the periphery, I might make reference to like historical figures, but the characters, I made them up. But I want the world that they're operating in to be accurate, like the politics, the times, what people were talking about, what were the issues of the day, what were people debating about, what were they nervous about, excited about. I want that all to feel real, but I want the characters to be completely created. And they're grounded in research and, you know, what I know about what people were like in that time. But I don't want to feel like, well, what was Abe Lincoln doing that month? I got to go double check and make sure it's right. Because that just sounds like so much harder. Plus, I just, again, as a fiction writer, I like having the freedom to kind of create my own people.
Is that it? If it is, I want to say thank you all. I want to say thank you all to you all too. Thank you for making CrimeScene a huge success.
Pete, thank you for having this. Thank you for having us. Thank you for doing this. This has been an awesome time.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Thank you, Pete.
Our pleasure.
Here's to Pete.
Yeah, thank you all. So, have fun. You all are free. Yeah. And thank you, folks. We're going to do this again in about 2 years, roughly in February again. And yeah, even better.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Y'all already done signing, right? So we get to
Yeah.
go back and do it again?
But I think we're supposed to go to the bookstore.
Okay.
I should ask Pete.
Thank you for that. I really